Aloha, beautiful beings, and welcome to another episode of the Yoni Havana podcast, where we explore consciousness, looking into how things work in the universe so we can enjoy life more and become more whole. If you are looking for support on your journey to wholeness, more gratitude in your life, and alignment with your divine purpose, please reach out to me via my website, Instagram, or Telegram. I'm currently taking on new clients, offering guidance in expanded states journeys, holistic lifestyle practices, and mindset coaching. On to the show. My guest today is Ian Mitchell, founder of Wizard Sciences and a research scientist and pharmaceutical consultant. He is the chief science officer at Redbud Brands and at HigherDOSE, as well as chief science advisor at Leela Quantum and science advisor at Satori Neuro. Ian is also Polymath in residence at Ecliptic Capital. In this episode, Ian shares how to get immediate and accurate answers to every question in the universe using kinesiology, why surrender is necessary to expand your consciousness, how miracles work, the science of coherence, why and how he lowered his level of consciousness after 28 years of a die-hard meditation practice, and much more. If you find value in this conversation, please share with someone you love. So enjoy this enlightening and illuminating conversation with Ian Mitchell. Aho. Ian, thank you for coming on to the show. Welcome.
Happy to be here, man. Very happy to be here.
Thank you for making the time. I'm honored. I'm a big fan. I've been a fan of yours for a few years now. Discovered you through Luke's story. Been taking Revive from C360 Health for about 3 years now, on and off, cycling. I love it. I can feel the difference when I take it, especially because I'm going through about a 3.5-year rib injury. So it came at the right timing for me in terms of the inflammation and misalignment. And it's a gift that I've been given, and I talked about it on the podcast a few times. And I'm glad that Todd Shipman has connected us. And
yeah, very much so.
I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
So, I'll kind of tee it for the audience that you've been on a few podcasts, if not more than a few, and you've shared it.
I've been on a few this week.
So. Yeah, here we go.
Yeah.
Amazing. And I've seen a common theme. You talk a good amount about C60, some longevity, NMN, V cells. There's a good amount about the longevity biohacking side. You do talk about, you're a part of Leela Quantum, and you talk about consciousness. This show is about diving into understanding consciousness to the depth of it, so people can enjoy this experience, which you seem to enjoy a lot. And that's, we talked about right before we started recording, about how much joy and humor and how often you laugh, which is perhaps not known to everybody, a super high vibration. I think it's kind of obvious. It's the essence of joy. I'm looking at your face and I'm hearing you on this podcast. You're really embodying joy. I don't know, level. We're going to get into map of consciousness, maybe 540. And perhaps, as the scales have been changed, we don't really know what's going on in there. But there's one of the things that I want to dive in, and we may be diving in pretty deep for people right off the bat. But what you seem to have as a gift, one of your gifts, because you have many, is that the spirituality and scientific and kind of physical matter side of things, you're really bridging the gap there. And kind of like, what's the science of consciousness is something that I want to talk to you about, because you seem to have the best grasp that I've seen of anybody so far in explaining those things. And I'll kick it to you to, we can start with the muscle testing, how access to consciousness levels, and however you want to take it.
Okay, muscle testing. So a lot of people, with kinesiology, they kind of can't possibly be right. And in reality, I was one of those people. I didn't really think that it had a lot of efficacy many years ago. And then I kind of went through a sort of a personal transformation. And during that process, I was working very diligently, like quite a great deal of time every day, on actually trying to become really accurate with muscle testing and seeing how it would work. And I read some of David Hawkins' stuff, and two of my friends, Todd Shipman and Luke Story, actually told me within 24 hours of each other that, hey, there's this book, Power versus Force. You should probably read it. And it was ironic because I had actually been invited to see Hawkins lecture right after he had written the book. And so, and this was, I guess, pretty early on, probably in the early 90s. And
Mm.
I declined. It was the fellow who taught me to meditate. And at the time, I was a diehard meditator. And I thought, nah, I'm good. I don't need to go see anything about consciousness. I'm just going to keep running down the path I'm running down. And the fellow who taught me, Taylor, he had traveled around the world with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the guy that started TM. And so I didn't really think anything of it. It was just kind of going about my business. And I saw Taylor the following day and said, "Hey, how was that, the thing you went to?" And he said, "Weird." And I said, "What do you mean? That's not terribly descriptive. Like what happened?" And he said, "Well, so this guy had written a book outlining the levels of consciousness on a scale from 0 to 1,000." I said, "Okay." And he said, so he started kind of explaining what the gradients were as you progress up and where the kind of the inflection points are, where the big changes happen. And he said, when he got to 700, he said, I think it'd be far easier to just show you than to tell you. And Taylor said he hopped down off the stage, and Taylor's description of the guy was kind of a wiry, scraggly old guy who was wearing overalls with white hair. And he said he started walking around the room, and when he would get within a couple of feet of people, they would erupt into tears. And the entire place was just crying tears of joy.
Uh,
And so I thought, wow, I think I chose poorly by not going to this. But in reality, I don't think I was really ready at the
mm,
time. I don't think I kind of, my nervous system probably wouldn't have handled it the same way that it would now. And, all things in their appropriate place and position and time. And it just wasn't quite ready yet. But, fast forward roughly, I don't know, 28 years or so. And, Luke and Todd recommended that I read that. So I thought, okay, I get it. I need to read this. So I cruised through it and was dumbfounded. And halfway through it, I actually had kind of a bizarre experience. And since the focus of this is consciousness, I'll just explain it, exactly as it happened. I was driving from my lab to a friend who's a neurosurgeon in Austin. I was driving to her lab, and I was driving, and literally halfway down I-35, my right arm flipped up like this involuntarily. And
really?
I was kind of thinking, what is going on? And then the top of my head felt like it exploded, and it was just felt like sparklers going off over the entire top of my head. And tears just started streaming down my face. At which point I was consciously thinking, am I stroking out? And I had just suddenly lost control of my hand. I was crying. My head was having this bizarre sensation, unlike anything I had ever felt. And so I literally pulled off the road and kind of let it subside. And I thought, God, that was really intense. But then it started happening every day. And then it started happening twice a day, then 3 times, then 4 times, then five, then more. And then eventually it stabilized into a state of permanence. And beyond that, things were very different. And my ability to actually do muscle testing, I had been working on it through that entire period and continue to work on it. And I couldn't do it. I had a block for some reason, and I couldn't do it, couldn't do it, couldn't do it. And then one morning I was 5 hours into working on it. I had gotten up at 3 a.m. and it was just shy of 8 a.m. And I had been working on it for about 5 hours and listening to lectures and stuff like that from Hawkins, kind of trying to drill into the mindset, rather than just try and learn the mechanics of something. It's typically best if you can sort of empathically link up with the person who's actually doing the instruction, because there's a lot of overlap and wash in consciousness. So as you're
mm,
proximate to something or someone, or trying to drill down with their particular vibration, you can actually glean a lot more insights than you'd think, because consciousness is kind of a fabric that connects everything. So as I was going through this process just shy of 8 a.m., it suddenly hit, and I could do it. And I had full awareness that it was at that moment I could now do this thing. And so, since it's kind of subjective, I thought, okay, well, I need to validate it. I'm a scientist. That's what I do. I validate and test things. So I called a friend of mine in Belgium and said, can we test this out? And so we picked a person, and he was good at calibrating things. And I said, okay, let's write our numbers down. So we were FaceTiming. And so we both wrote the number down and held it up to the screen at the same time. It was the exact same number. And I thought, great, got this. So then I continued to work on it. I was doing research projects at the time. And so I thought, okay, well, this is a good opportunity to test this out, because I'm running all these spectral analysis things at the lab. And the university where I used to teach, I was, using a UV vis spectroscopy, and you get pretty good analytics on things, and you can see all the differentiations and points on things for what their makeup is. So I was using that particular tool, and I thought, hey, this is a good opportunity for me to test and see how this stuff lines up. So I took 20 different things and I assessed them and ranked all 20. Then I ran the analysis and they all lined up. And I thought, damn, that's kind of impressive. Like, holy cow, this is a fantastic tool. Why have I not used this before? So then I kept refining it, and I was working with one of the people in the lab here, and she was doing a preparation for a chemotherapeutic agent that we were working on. And I wanted to know, I had her make 4 variations of it, and I wanted to know how they were going to perform. So I calibrated through everything really rapidly and wrote down their percent of cytotoxicity, which is basically just how many cancerous cells are they going to kill out of a specific portion of cells. And so I wrote all 4 numbers down, took a picture, time stamped it, showed her the results, and then we did all the testing over the next 2 weeks. And 3 of the numbers were exactly spot on. One was off by 7%. But it was still to be able to do that in literally 2 minutes and get an accurate percentage and then have one, be off. I mean, granted, I got the actual data, so I knew what it was at the end of the day, but it was still stunning to me that it was actually that precise a tool that without any referential points of anything, I was able to go down to the number in terms of their percentile. Now, it wasn't, the decile percentile, but it was just, I did it straight down to like 66%, 68%, 42%, 73%. And all the numbers lined up except one, and that was the one that was 7% off. But it was still, it was compelling to me. And so then I continued to work on it and thought, okay, this has really got merit. So then after kind of my reservations about that consciously were dissipating, I was working on a project and I needed to develop a fireproofing material. So I just tapped in and calibrated out all of the formulas for that were necessary to make it. And when I was looking at it, the kind of the conscious part of my mind, the chemist part, looked at it and thought, this is absolutely bonkers. It makes no sense. One's flammable, one's highly explosive, one's going to act as an accelerant. I'm probably going to blow myself up. But the reality is the collective knows far more than any individual point on it. And, my whole goal there was to tap in and try and create something. So I kind of threw caution to the wind, went in and synthesized the compound. And then the first experiment we did, we actually coated an egg and took one egg uncovered and then took a benzomatic MAP gas torch that we have here at the lab that's 3,730 degrees and cranked it up and put it on the first egg unprotected, and it blew up, literally exploded in about a second. The second egg that had the little coating on it, I kept it going until it was glowing red. And I was kind of thinking, it's just going to burn the hell out of this thing. There's no way this thing is surviving. And so the surface was completely black, kept it running for well over a minute. I made a joke, like the egg looks great on reentry as I was looking at it, but it was glowing red. It looked like a lava flow.
Wow.
And then after over a minute, I took the heat off and I counted to 4, and then I put my hand on it and all the heat was gone.
Wow.
So it was, you could touch it. I'll send you the video. It was just kind of remarkable, actually. And then I cracked the egg open and the egg was uncooked. And I thought, okay, obviously, again, the universe is collectively far more in tune and tapped in than one individual will ever be. So for me, I've had all these experiences where I've done this consistently over and over and tried to refine it. And I actually still practice it. A good way to do that is like to take Hawkins' books and, get his levels of consciousness and cover them with one sheet of paper and then calibrate until you hit all of those. And then kind of a more advanced step would be to take a phone book. That's a book with numbers for people, for those who just use Google now, and cover up the phone numbers and then calibrate through until you hit the phone numbers. And that's, it takes a little time, but if you want efficacy, that's kind of what you need to do. Like anything else, you sort of put in the work. So the mechanism of that is what's intriguing to me, because how this actually functions is the universe is a collection of waveforms, right? So everything is vibrating. Like we express solidity and we think we're solid, but we're not, right? Anytime you touch something, you're just blink, blink, pushing on electron clouds. You're not actually contacting anything. Your cloud-like waveform is interacting with their cloud-like waveform, and you feel whatever the thing is repelling against you. And so when you kind of drill down to that level, you realize, oh, things function harmonically right? So things are interacting in a vibratory fashion. Well, when that happens, you have either constructive interference patterns or destructive interference patterns. When you have something that harmonizes, the constructive interference pattern increases the amplitude of the signal. So the signal gets stronger. When it's destructive interference, the signal gets weaker. So something that is expressing truth or validity to whatever degree expresses a higher amplitude, and hence the power that's going in accord with that increases. Something that is expressing a lesser degree of truth, what people would generally say is, false or a negative, it's just expressing less of that degree of energy. So the potential declines. And so you can gauge that declination as something very true or less true or tremendously less true. And when you do that, you start to realize, oh, all these wave functions are just providing signals. And so if you start to pay attention to the signals, you can actually pull out and assess what is and is not the path towards validity of some concept or construct. And so that's why it's probably the primary tool that I use every day. I mean, I still back everything up with spectroscopy or analysis, but that is kind of my go-to because it tells me, am I moving in the right path? Am I not moving in the right path? So that's kind of the brief explanation of how that works.
Thank you so much. And there are so many things I want to follow on. And the first one, I want to make a clarification and help here for people that want to get into muscle testing, into what's your method of muscle testing, and let's get into how they can hone their skills. Are you using the duckbill test? I mean, and we're gonna get people into the video. Which are you lifting your own arm? What's your practice?
So I usually do it a couple of different ways. So I will either loop my fingers and pull and feel a resistance, or I'll clamp my fingers and pull one through. Or I will do to see if I lean forward or lean backwards. Or sometimes I'll have a second person come in and I'll use their arm and just blind them from what the question actually is. And then the other thing that's kind of a more recent one, I was having coffee with my youngest son a couple of weeks ago, and he asked me, he said, what's your accuracy on a coin toss? And I said, 100%. And he said, without your fingers. I said, I have no idea. That's a great question. Let's try it out. So we did it, and the state that I kind of put myself in is I sort of opened up, and I was trying to feel for dips or increases in energy, and I hit 9 out of 10, so it was pretty precise.
Nice. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it was pretty good. But you could very, very much viscerally feel when the energy tapers off or when the energy increases. So you just have to kind of tune into your own system, because you can literally feel the pulse of either the increase or the decrease when you make the statement. And so it's I've tried to use all of those different modalities. My primary is just kind of pulling my fingers, but as of late I've actually found that I'm more accurate if I just center myself and feel what the dip is. Now, it's a little trickier when you're trying to do something in terms of percentage, because usually with your fingers you can go very rapidly and sort of sort for the break and the potential. And if you're just feeling it, it's probably in truth because I'm not as practiced, but it seems to work more effectively.
That's so cool. So I want to get a deeper clarification here. So for somebody who wants to get into muscle testing, and sounds like Ian is advanced, very advanced. For example, Ian just mentioned he can predict a coin toss to 100% accuracy. So an example would be, and if you can help me here, is before the coin toss will be happening, I'm going to ask the question if it's going to be heads or tails, right? And then get an answer from, I'm going to call it from the divine, from kinesiology. If it's constructive, it's asking, is it tails? So the questions will be only yes or no. And if and I think, and I want to get your clarification when you said and I'm kind of backtracking, when you said you couldn't do it, kinesiology before all the I'm going to call it an upgrade in consciousness. Do you mean you were doing the techniques and just getting inconsistent results, or not such strong or clear signs of constructive or destructive?
Well, both actually. So the signs weren't as clear, but I set up things so I could test, so I would have a way to validate, and I was just inconsistent. I could not do it. And actually, that particular morning when I had the snap to that, oh, I can do it. What actually changed, the precipitating event there was I no longer was attached to the outcome. I
Hmm.
didn't care.
Hmm.
It didn't make a difference. I was going to execute on it, whether it was or was not something that I liked. Because there's two things that are going on. You have your kind of your persona, and it assesses things based on your experiences and what you're doing and how you approach life. And then you have, the much larger aspect of yourself that you can tap into. And so I was kind of going from the smaller self with a little s as opposed to the bigger self with a capital S. And because of that, I had attachments to what the result would be. And now I don't have those attachments. And it's kind of, admittedly, it's a little awkward sometimes. I was at a dental office 3 weeks ago, I suppose now, with a Dr. Amy Ludeman, and she's a great dentist. And I was having an abscessed tooth, and the pain was very intense. And I went in and she said, well, okay, we'll work on it today. Come back tomorrow and see how it is. So we did the first day. It helped, but the pain didn't subside and my jaw was swollen and it was really, really brutal. And so I came back the second day and she said, well, do you want us to extract it? And I, calibrated through, and the answer was a no. Now, did I want it extracted? Yeah, very much so,
Hmm.
because it hurt a lot.
Hmm.
But, again, know what you know what you don't know. And obviously, there was a larger thing at play. Now, that particular tooth, it was interesting because it had abscessed 5 years prior to. And when I had the x rays done 5 years ago, the tooth was considered dead. The nerves were shot, and they told me I needed a root canal. And at which point I said, why can't you just regrow the nerves? Well, when I went in and had the x rays done this time, half of the nerve cluster is regrown. So it actually, the procedure that I kind of worked out for it has been working. So at least half of the nerves have regrown, and it was the tooth number 30, so your first molar,
Hmm.
and but it's there. So that's probably why it didn't qualify to be extracted, rather just deal with it. And now everything's fine and back to normal. But again, as I said, know what you know what you don't know. If you have the resource, you don't want to be, as I think Hawkins maybe said this, or someone said this, you don't want to be an asshole. You don't want to ask the question, get the answer, and then not listen to it.
Hmm.
That's kind of a fallacious approach. You just don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Personally, I think if you don't actually, I think it decreases your abilities and your efficacy if you get an answer and then you don't follow through with it. And that's part of the kind of the non-attachment that I think is really necessary and sort of commensurate with being able to get those answers more effectively and more accurately, is you have to follow through with the information you're given. If you ask the universe for some clarification and it provides it, and then you go, I'm going to do my own thing, what good is that? It's like having access to a supercomputer and doing a very large math problem gives you a 10-digit answer, and you go, no, I'm pretty sure the answer is 8. I mean, it's like, it's orders of magnitude so much more tapped in and connected and has potential to express than we do, that if you don't listen to it, personally, I think it degrades your capacity for it. Now, that's my hunch. I don't have any data to back that up.
A few things that I want to follow up here. First one, a little tangent, is with regrowing nerves or actually body parts. I know I'm going to sound like a lizard right now, but Joe Dispenza just shared a story of one of the people that went to one of his retreats. This woman had her thyroid gland removed, and lo and
Mhm.
behold, after doing the work, magic and miracles happen. She has a new thyroid, so she has grown a new thyroid gland. So this is just out there to get some people excited about possibilities in this reality, in this illusion of the matter of the reality. Another one.
Well, that's entirely possible, man. I mean, the science actually backs that up. There are so many reports of that, and specifically, just to chime in,
Please.
when you go to something like Joe Dispenza's retreats, right? So he gets 1,500 people up at 4 a.m. When your melatonin level is at its peak, which is going to turn to tryptophan, which is then going to potentially turn into
It's.
DMT.
Mhm.
So it's putting people in a state where their consciousness is they're going to perceive an expansion in their own consciousness. So it's going to put them in a slightly enhanced state. And then when you have a large group of people, what transpires is a coherence function, and it's that same harmonic resonance that I was talking about. So when things sympathetically resonate, the amplitude increases, and the the tangible demonstration of this for somebody who thinks like, oh, thought can't really do anything. Well, maybe, and a light breeze might not do much. But if you've ever watched the video of the Tacoma Fall Narrows Bridge, right? They didn't calculate for resonance when they built the bridge, and there was simply just a light wind, but it just happened to hit the resonant harmonic for the entire bridge. So over the span of a day, the wave built up enough amplitude because it was constantly building that it actually ripped the suspension bridge apart. So when you put things in coherence and you have a large group of people focusing on things becoming coherent, the energy expressed is tremendous. And one of the big problems with regenerating tissue, organs, limbs, is that it's certainly doable mechanically. We lack the energetic component. I have the supposition that people won't be able to fully regrow limbs until they realize that it's not an endogenous function, it's a partially exogenous function. You have to have both components. You have to have the signal strength increased from the external component that defines where things actually move and function and how they regrow and proliferate the cells into a something. And typically, as people get older, they lose energy, right? So most people over time lose energy and sadly lose intelligence too. And there are only a couple of exceptions to that. But if you put someone in a very enhanced coherent state, their amplitude goes up, their energy goes up, their ATP output goes up. Everything like that coincides. And I actually do have data on that. So I feel very confident in saying you can elicit tremendous shifts in a biological system just by virtue of coherent force via thought. So, or not, it's honestly, it's not so much thought as intent. It's an expression of consciousness through the volition of choice. So that's kind of a little granular, but I'm sure this audience is, probably looking for things that are a little bit deeper explanation than I would normally give.
And I do want to go on a little definition with your help. So coherence and coherent, that means a lot of waves vibrating on this pretty much on the same frequency, building up to higher energy of the same frequency. Right. That's what coherence means.
Exactly.
Yeah. So and
it's the difference.
Yeah, go ahead.
Between a light bulb and a laser, right? Same number of emissive photons. One you can maybe warm a hot dog. The other you can punch a hole through steel.
Yeah.
And it's just the difference in coherence. One is diffuse, and so a lot of the interactions are negating things, right? You have nodal interaction that cancels out the waveform, so the energy drops. With coherent light, everything moves at exactly the same rate. And that actually, I always use that as a signal. That's entirely not how light is actually moving, but for sake of simple explanation, that's it. It's actually waveforms are moving in a much more complicated fashion than that.
Really? What
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that for a bit?
Sure. So some of the simple things that people don't realize is, and I've done this in lectures. There was a lecture I gave a while back on stage, and you've had Philip from Leela on, and Todd, and Todd has a really horrible shellfish allergy, right? And so if he has any sort of shellfish, throat swells up, he has a bad histamine reaction, breaks out in hives. And so I brought Todd on stage and I derma rolled his arm, and then I opened a can of crab juice and put the crab juice or crab meat and put the juice from the crab on. And of course, he had exactly what you'd have, because the derma roller, for those who don't know, it's just a little wheel with a lot of needles on it, and it perforates the tissue. So it's basically what I was doing is mimicking a dermal stamp test that an allergist would give, where you punch a hole in the tissue and then you administer something to see if there's a histamine reaction. So as per the norm, Todd's arm popped up and swelled up, and he had a really bad histamine reaction. Then I put the crab meat in a quantum block. And there are lots of different modalities to manipulate and modulate frequencies. And the quantum block is a really good one. But I put the can in the quantum block, and then I talked about waveforms. And I said, everyone picture a wave. And, everyone pretty much pictures that as a waveform. But in reality, that's kind of a very simple 2D representation. So what you actually have is you have spheres that are moving, and they have a particular pressure gradient and a chirality and a speed and a direction and a color. Color is even a dimension, because if you think about it, that's gauging the wavelength, the distance between the wavelengths, right? So you're looking at it, and that too is a dimension. So there's probably 19 things, that really clearly define what a waveform is doing, right? If you wanted to actually thoroughly express a waveform, it'd probably take about, by my reckoning, about 19 things to actually do it. Now, in the case of what I did with that, to modulate the waveforms a bit, I put it in the quantum block, modulated them so that they would be more conducive to Todd's particular biology. Then I took the can out. About 3 minutes later, I derma rolled his other arm with a new derma roller, and then I put the crab juice in, and nothing happened. And so a lot of the people in the audience kind of went, "Meow," like a dog that heard a new sound, because you don't typically, by standard classical thought, you can't eliminate someone's allergies in 3 minutes, right? They're not going to have an allergic reaction to it on one arm and not on the other arm. But in reality, it goes back to thinking of things as having solidity. They're not, they're just waveforms. So when you go down to a level that's 2 or 3 levels below the subatomic and you actually smooth out the edges, then you don't have that cascading effect where there's a harsh interaction from a waveform level, which then cascades up to, subatomic, atomic, molecular, and then ultimately a histamine reaction. That's really more like a quaternary effect, like a tertiary quaternary effect of those sort of interactions. And so you can negate those. But again, it takes an actual understanding of what am I manipulating? How do these waveforms work? Now, most people probably won't look at it the way I do. And you can just get a quantum block and use something like that, or there are other devices out that do the same thing. But for me personally, it's helpful to understand the actual mechanisms behind all of these things. I'm a scientist, right? That's what I kind of do. Is I really want to understand. I'm probably painfully curious, just because I want to know.
It's so beautiful. There's something I want to touch on that you said. Humans, perhaps, as you were saying, instead of the solidity, waveforms, right? Creating
Right.
and these waveforms with the thoughts, right, with their words, and you were talking also about listening to someone, rather than just, I think, the vibrations in text as well, but listening and hearing the more of the vibration of those teachings, and that frequency helps to embody, as you're saying, kind of washing the consciousness, helps with accelerating and embodying those waveforms. But I want to touch on that because I talk about it and other people talk about it right now, and they're saying we're co-creating the universe, co-creating our present moment and the future. That's as scientific as it gets. We're talking about waveforms. We're all studying these waveforms and getting access to consciousness through kinesiology to the database, to the supercomputer database, is getting access to them, all of them, and seeing what's the majority in there. And based on that, that's the truth of what we're constantly co-creating as drops of God, of consciousness, however people want to put it into words. But to me, it really ties in, and like, think people, get the idea, they feel it in their hearts, the truth. This is, as you're saying, you're getting into the science. This is just the way it works. Just simple as that. There's no arguing about it. Waveforms, we're looking down, we're getting down into the nitty-gritty details of how these things work. And to me, it's fascinating. I hope this resonates with somebody as they think about, let's say, a thought, or as you're saying, they're going to get an answer or an intuition about doing something, but their egoic identity, also a creation, will say like, no, I don't want it to be as you were saying, a 10-digit solution. I want it to be 8. My identity has some interest, some attachments, and some expectation that is going to be different. The problem is the majority of waves already decided that it's going to be something else. So going against the universe, and this is when I sometimes watch myself, like I'm going to raising my voice in my 4-year-old daughter, and I'm just kind of getting into, my egoic identity, kind of my not self theme, which, has its own wounds. And I'm watching myself doing something that I know is not constructive. And I get now, kind of like with the muscle test, as soon as I do something that I know is not constructive to the universe, to life, I get reprimanded. I don't know by how exactly it happens, but like I may like bump into a door. I may my foot, like I say something, and my wife watches it sometimes in real time. It happens instantaneously, which I love because I get I get
That's great.
the feedback is immediate. Like I already know. Yeah, I'm paying my dues very. Yeah, I'm paying my dues very quickly, and I enjoy that I don't have to wait a long time and perhaps get it in like a flood or something, So and I'm thinking kind of like just trying to get my head above water, but I'm getting little nudges now. I think as I've been doing a good amount of work and I have more of the intuition, and I feel like the more I know and I have the access to the energy that says like not a good choice, or like not about to make a good choice, it's like Told you, so, and I want to, and I'm going backtracking because I think this, the muscle testing kinesiology is such an amazing tool. And you were talking about accuracy. People think like, oh, how can he know numbers? How can they like have a conversation? One person is on one side. What is this calibration? We're talking about getting it to like the exact numbers and results of something. And and you can help me here. But the questions of asking is looking for the yes or no. So, for example, calibrating a person on a consciousness level, and a good amount of the audience is familiar with the map of consciousness. So we're gonna ask, is it above 500? And we get a yes. Is it above 600? We get a no. Is it above 5 4? Am I correct in my
Yeah,
explanation here?
yeah.
So in this,
So yeah, I typically ask, is the level of consciousness above, and then express the number.
mhm.
And at the point at which my fingers move, or I lean backwards, or whatever particular thing I'm doing at that moment, that's kind of where the breaking point is. What actually, out of curiosity, what method do you use?
I use a
What's your
I,
kind
I
of
use I use a duckbill test. So I get my index finger, and I put the pressure with the other one, and that's the one that I learned actually from Paul Check when I did the Paul Check holistic lifestyle training in 2020, and I was surprised that was part of the training. I'm like, I've heard about muscle testing, and I was using that to see what my body wants to eat. And I went to a biohacking retreat, and I looked at the food, and I was like telling myself like, yes, sweet potatoes. I like sweet potatoes, but my feeling is just kind of asking like, dear body, do you want, would you like sweet potatoes? And he's like, no. Then I would ask him, dear body, thank you. And I'm like clearing, dear body, would you like some like smoked fish? And he's like, yes. And then I asked portions. So I was using it in the beginning just to kind of get the simple answers of taking care of my instrument of consciousness that I borrowed that description from Dr. Dispenza. I'm a big fan. And when
Mhm.
you talked about the DMT earlier, I'm a big fan of DMT. I see it as access to a lot of great things in the world, in consciousness, that is. And
Yeah, agreed.
yeah,
I think it's like training wheels. I think it's actually a very good thing, because it elicits in people who don't have the time, or perhaps the inclination, or something like that, and hence kind of confine themselves into a narrow bandwidth of reality. Things like that actually expand that very rapidly. Now, you can elicit every single one of those states that you can on any substance without doing anything, because they're always persistent. It's just you're typically not accessing or looking at it. I mean, they're always, the potentiality for that is there, but it's a great training wheel, because you can see something and then go, holy cow, that's a state that exists. How do I do that? How do I get back to that? How can I integrate that with my normal daily consciousness? And I think those things are tremendous tools. Actually, plant medicine as a whole, a lot of some some things I think have slightly detrimental consequences, because if your nervous system isn't supple enough to actually handle that load of energy, it can kind of fry you. It's sort of like
Mhm.
a penny in a fuse box. A lot of people had issues post LSD, because they weren't quite at that point, and they were blowing the circuits open with a lot more energy than it really should be expressed at that point. But you can do the same thing just with breathing, right? Like Stan Grof's holotropic breathing. You can elicit those same responses, but the same thing holds. You can actually overload a person's system if you do something too much in excess. I think that's kind of Buddha kind of nailed it, right? The string can't be too taut, or it breaks, or it can't be too slack, or the tone doesn't happen. You have to have the string on the instrument just right, so that you
Mhm.
can get that. And sometimes people don't experiment enough, and sometimes they recreationally experiment too much. And I do think there's a very beneficial spot where a lot of those compounds really have tremendous therapeutic benefit, but more mind expanding benefit, just so people can see what the potential is, so they can see what's there and actually have a direct experience. Because it's a very different thing for people to have an experience as opposed to read about an experience. When you personally experience something, you know it to be a reality, and at least from your frame of reference at that point. And one other thing I wanted to mention on the note of coherence, as it relates to consciousness. One of the reasons I always tell people to listen to somebody like David Hawkins as opposed to just reading the book. The book is great. Got it, love it. But if you can actually just pull down Audible and listen to it, it's far better when someone at that level of consciousness reads something to you, because not only does light become coherent, sound can also become coherent. And once your consciousness passes over 600, you experience coherence. And so a person who is beyond that threshold, their voice has a certain caliber of resonance within everyone else, and it makes people want to listen to it. It's very soothing, very calming, and you actually become somewhat entrained, and it pulls people in. So when you have somebody who's got a very advanced consciousness, it's really great if you listen to what they have to say, because it expresses things to you on a deeper level than if you just read what they had written.
Thank you for sharing that. And it reminds me, as we're talking about the Dr. Joe Dispenza retreats, by now it's over 2,000 people meditating at the same time. Yeah, some days you start at 4 a.m., coming with the melatonin, the tryptophan, the DMT, and all of them are a lot of them are incoherence. And that, as you were saying, so the endogenous, exogenous, now getting that healing from more than one waveform at 600 in coherence. It's that energy is overwhelmingly positive to create a lot of energy to heal, to expand. I mean, the expansion is going in those rooms just by going to these retreats. One of the guests on my show has been to 15 retreats. She's a spiritual teacher. She's a galactic shaman. She's got it down, but she keeps going to bask in that energy, knowing that she can do it with a few friends where she lives in Sarasota. But there's an opportunity of doing that with 2,000 people in the same room. So I do want to emphasize again that listening to people at that level and being surrounded by that energy, people can talk about, you're the sum of the kind of the average of the 5 closest people to you. There's some truth there for sure. Also going and spending time in I'm going to call it divine love now, and peace and light. It will affect you positively. You will gravitate towards it. It will feel amazing. And as you were saying with Hawkins there in the 90s, just by him going around the room, people are like, oh my God, I just feel amazing. There's as you're saying, no substance. They're not squeezing their spine to get the fluids to release the crystals of the DMT in the pineal gland. That is happening just by basking in the energy. And as you're saying, in the matter of direct experience, and in the matter of having the experience first in order to have the motivation and inclination to find the target. This is why I host men's retreats that include plant medicine. And actually, one of the tools that I do for screening is to use muscle testing. I use all kinds of tools. I have a business partner. I'm 36, and he's his 50s, much more experienced, medicine man. I bring some other things to the table, and we've had 100% success with everybody. And only after a while, I do talk about Dr. Joe Dispenza, but only after a while, usually, and we have our monthly calls, and actually we're going to have our first camping trip for the whole, everybody that has ever attended a retreat. So we're, building this brotherhood. We call it a divine masculinity brotherhood. Only at some point I really give them the nudge, like, you experienced it, like you had the release of DMT, you experienced it firsthand, you were doubting it. And then I talk about Leela, and I make necklaces for a lot of people. I mean, that's why I start with the blocks, to be able to make whatever frequencies I want. Some of them are older men in their 60s that could use a boost of testosterone, and I think that I have all kinds of ways to boost testosterone more naturally that I think is more effective, and perhaps without the side effects. So all of that connects. And I think, as you were saying, the matter of direct experience. I was an atheist when I was a teenager I'm from Israel, and I just used, mind logically, like, if there's a God, how come this is the circumstances of my life, my family? I mean, that doesn't seem like a good experience. There can't be a loving God creating this now. And I mentioned this on the show many times. Actually, yeah, I mean, it's all God, it's all consciousness. Abuser, the abusing. It's for the sake of experience. It's for the sake of polarity, also of going down all the way to the bottom of the map of consciousness, and then going up again, and the polarity of things. And I'm thinking about electrons and protons kind of doing their dance. I mean, it's and you're how much you laugh. We're just here to have a game and dance. I don't really see much more to it. It's fun as you're doing it, to find answers, kind of do puzzles, and the puzzles get more advanced as one has the stamina and desire to be uncomfortable with those things, and release attachment to outcomes. The game becomes more and more fun, 100%. And I think that a lot of it is this show. How can we make this game more fun? It is a game. It is not as important as people think. We can put some importance on some things. It is important to me in the subjective reality speak to you and share this information, because I think it's more joyful and to know how the game works, and be inspired, and find more wholeness and access to all-encompassing consciousness, and figure out how things work, rather than stay in a lot of belief state of thinking like, oh, I think this is how it works. I mean, I'm outsourcing my religion to this minister. Yes, and I like to say everything is important and not important equally. That's so yeah, my 2 cents there. I hope this resonates with people.
Yeah, one of the things I heard a spiritual teacher, Amachi Mata Amrananda, my many moons ago. Somebody asked her a question and said, "Well, if everything is one thing and everything is connected, then why can't I just do what I want and behave poorly or behave well just as I want?" And she said, "No, it's entirely true. You can. The moment that fire no longer affects you and you're beyond that threshold, you can do whatever you want." And I always thought, boy, that really brings it back down to reality for people. The moment at which fire no longer affects you and you're not capable of being physically damaged by things, have at it. And it's very telling. But that too is kind of a personal experience. So I very much look forward to people having their own experiences and realizing that everything is to a great degree subjective. I don't know that there is truly an objective reality, because there's so many, as you said, kind of that dynamic interaction where you're creating your reality based on your perception, your level of consciousness, how you're viewing things. Any one of the biggest turning points for me, I was kind of moving up through my own progression and levels of consciousness, and the single biggest turning point was realizing that actually it was realizing that the harm that someone else had caused another person for whom I cared dearly, they had actually done a very horribly violent thing and had caused less detriment to that person than I had, just by doing passive comments that weren't even intended to be harmful. And it was because the weight that was placed on my comments was greater than the
Mm.
weight that was placed on that entire interaction. And when that finally snapped to, it was a breakthrough, because I experientially felt the shift and gained the understanding that there is a certain subjectivity based on your perspective, and neither is right nor wrong. People are always generally moving for the things that they consider to be right in that moment. Objectively or culturally, we may not view those things as right or correct, but from that person's particular perspective at that moment, they're viewing things as, this is the thing that aligns the best, this is the direction I should move. And when you have that experience and realize, wow, I've actually caused more harm to someone that I love dearly by trying to do things, and than someone who's actually done very damaging things that outwardly are really horrific. It was eye opening. I mean, truly, it was a very very eye opening experience. But you start to realize there is not one definitive answer. It's all perspective based and relativistic. So
Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned you were a diehard meditator, or perhaps still, for many years, and I wonder, how'd you start? What was your practice, if you can share?
sure. So the very first thing I did was I went to it was kind of interesting. In my early 20s, I had this overwhelming sense that there was something going on that I wasn't perceiving. Like, I knew that there was more than I was experiencing. I just didn't know what it was. And it was kind of like a splinter in my mind. I couldn't stop focusing on it. So I literally read every theological, philosophical, comparative religion sort of text that I could get my hands on, pretty much every major religion in the world. And what came up for me is that, kind of assessing these things logically, I thought, okay, the common theme here is that the people who are sort of at the pinnacle of whatever religion or philosophy it is, they've basically all shut up at some point, gone inward instead of outward, and then things open up and they have this kind of awakening sort of experience. I thought, okay, well, that's what I need to do. So I took a sabbatical from my job, and my dad, actually, at the time, he was so concerned with what I was doing that he drove 6 hours to come see me and say, like, hey, what's going on here, are you okay? And I said, listen, I have this feeling, and it's like I'm at a concert, and all of the highs and all of the lows are gone. the only thing that really seems to hit me is something that's so shrill that it hurts, or so bassy that it actually moves me. And I really feel like reality has kind of been subjected to this constriction where it's in this little narrow band, and that's what we're perceiving. And it was I guess a good enough explanation that he went, okay, have at it. So I split and went to get used to silence. I was gonna just go to Rishikesh, actually, in India, and in order to get used to that, I went to a Jesuit monastery, and I would spend my days reading religion and things like autobiography of a yogi,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to meditate. And when I say trying to meditate, it was fruitless. I was basically just sitting there with my eyes closed. And then through kind of a very a very direct path at the time that seemed kind of circuitous, but in retrospect, I can look at it and go, God bless. The path that I was kind of nudged down was probably the fastest way to get all of this stuff done. I couldn't have created a situation for me to have a more direct route, even though it was through tremendous degree of obstacles, personally and socially. But I ended up meeting a fella and wanting to learn to meditate, and was taught TM. And the difference was genuinely like riding a tricycle somewhere or hopping a jet. I mean, one was almost no forward motion or experience, and the other one is just wow, zooming by. And the experiences were pretty profound pretty quickly. And so I just consistently did it and kept up doing it, and did that for quite a few decades until suddenly, when I was driving down the road on I-35, it was kind of like the jeweler took the hammer and went beak, and just shattered the gemstone at the right spot. But it took, in my case, 28 years for that to actually kind of come to fruition. So TM was the first thing. And then after I received my final instruction on TM, I just consistently did that. And then I received a mantra from a saint, and then used that as a mantra for many years. And then at a certain point, I was no longer able to meditate with people or myself. And the only way I could do it was if I was going to meditate with someone else. I guess I shouldn't say with people, but I would have to have specific people, because it had become an indulgence, because it truly was probably my favorite thing to do in the world. But beyond a certain point, it's kind of like if you get used to carrying a raft on your head when you're on the other side of the river, you don't just carry it on your head. You've used it for its purpose. And at that point, I was just very accustomed to the ritualistic aspect of meditation, but it wasn't something that I should be doing by myself anymore. I should be sharing kind of the waveforms and the emissions with other people, because otherwise it truly had just become an indulgence, which incidentally coincided with the point at which I started eating meat again, because I had been a diehard vegetarian for 28 years.
Wow.
And the whole purpose of that was clarity. I was in line to get supper at the monastery I was in, and I literally was going up to get beef stew, and I heard a voice clearly, very outside of myself, say, "You can no longer do that." And and in the context, I thought, okay, check. And so I didn't. For 28 years, I didn't touch it. And then I had another experience, at which point I heard another voice, and the direction was slightly different. And I basically just said, you're making a choice here. You can either do this and have one consequence, or not do this and have another consequence. And so I opted to kind of shift things back and slow things down a little bit, and start eating meat again, which was actually a very strange thing, just from a scientific perspective, because your body, you lose a lot of the enzymes that break down meat if you don't have it for decades. And so for me, after 28 years, the previous decade, if I had anything that someone had accidentally put meat in, or something like that, it would literally wreck my stomach, just horribly wreck me. And when I kind of heard this last voice, I thought, okay, well, I want to stick it out here, so I'm going to go grab some meat. So I literally went out and bought a pound of bacon, cooked it up, and I was fully prepared. It was a Sunday morning. I was fully prepared to just be writhing in pain for quite a while. And I cooked it, and I ate the entire pound of bacon, and nothing happened. Like, absolutely nothing happened. I went, okay, fair enough. And again, universe collectively knows far more than I do as an individual critter. So I'm just going to roll with it. And since then, it's been going on 2 years now, and I I'm still doing that. It's funny because I don't actually really like it per se. I think if I had my druthers, I'd probably just eat lots of veggies and call it good. But I guess I need something about those particular constituents in me. So
When you say you need it, you feel more energized, you feel more coherent.
no, I feel slower.
Oh, you're enjoying the slowdown by eating
Yeah,
meat
I'm
normally.
enjoying the grounding
The grounding.
because
Okay.
I had become so ephemeral at a point
Mhm.
that I literally would have to look to see where my body was.
I see.
I would actually have to look down and go, feet,
I
arms, got
see.
it.
So,
I had completely, yeah, delocalized in terms of where I was physically, and so I no longer really thought of this particular thing as me, and the disconnect was so vast that it just was kind of a sort of an afterthought. Actually, the physicality was just sort of a memory, and in order to slow it down to a point where I was grounded and felt connected,
mm,
I needed to put something in sort of the hologram, if you will, to kind of vibe it down a little bit. Now, honestly, at this point, I neither need it nor don't need it.
mhm,
But I'm still kind of as force of habit. It's actually the only way that I really socially relate is to go out and eat with people.
mhm.
So it's from that standpoint, it's very nice. I enjoy it. It's beneficial and kind of beautiful because I get to go and break bread, and do things like that. And I think there's a lot to that. Having a shared experience with a group of people you care about is kind of a beautiful thing, regardless of what that shared experience is. Well, maybe not clubbing harp seals or something, but other than that, just kind of a joint shared experience is a good thing.
That is very much of a description of the experience that Doc Hawkins had. When he was writing the map of consciousness, is that he would look at the mirror and try to find his body. To the ones, perhaps,
I
yeah,
think it kind of happens to everybody at certain points.
yeah. It sounds,
So it's
as you were saying, it sounds like a very high vibration that, as you're saying, can have some, and I want to talk about attachment in a second, but detachment from the body too, right? And as I say, the sages, the enlightened ones, really, there's a great degree of detachment. And it sounds like you started using meat just to kind of get a little bit slow it down to
yeah,
be able to have a more physical matter, solid conversation. I mean, experience in that
yeah.
way. Is that,
Very
yeah?
much. And so one of the things, actually, one of the big sticking points was in our culture, surrender is kind of an odd concept, especially for men. And, somebody in my position where I run a facility and I have companies and things like that, and you're in a position of authority, the idea of full surrender to something larger than yourself, generally it's kind of frowned upon to be subordinate, right? But surrender is necessary at a certain threshold for your consciousness to move forward. It cannot move forward until you surrender. And so I felt as if I had surrendered, but on the note of the physical connection, I actually went to see our friend Todd Shipman because Todd does a lot of shamanic things and he does medicines from the Amazon. And one of those, I don't know if you've ever done Sananga, but it's kind of an Amazonian eye drop.
Just a couple weeks ago.
And oh, okay, yeah.
I did
So yeah,
combo. Sananga was the precursor, and I've done it a
perfect.
bunch of times. It's a fun one for the ones who enjoy the expanded states.
Yeah. Well, so the experience I had, I was trying to think about, well, how can I actually see if I've really surrendered things physically? I feel like I have, but I'd like to validate. So I called Todd and I went to his place in Florida and said, "Hey, will you do that Sananga thing on me?" Because I thought, optic nerve, right in your eyes. Basically, it's capsaicin in your eyes, so you're pepper spraying yourself, willingly pepper spraying yourself. So I laid down and had him administer the drops in my eyes, opened my eyes, rolled them around, laid there, got up, and Todd had kind of a dumbfounded look. And you can ask him about this because I think he still thinks it was somewhat strange. He said, "I've never seen that." I said, "What?" And he goes, "You had no reaction. Like your respiration didn't change, your muscles didn't tense, nothing happened." And I said, "Oh, I felt everything, but
Mm.
it was a full surrender, right?" And if you're going to surrender, you truly surrender everything. You surrender your experience, your attachment, your perceptions. Like you may have it move through you, but you don't latch onto them. You don't hold your perception. You just let them go. And it was interesting, and much much in accord with doing it. I checked right afterwards, and got the nudge that I had to do it a second time. So I laid down again and said, "Can you do it again?" And he said, "Never had anybody ask for that twice." And so we did it a second time, and it was a good validation though, because I think it's important to really kind of gauge where you are objectively, and in a world that is entirely subjective, sometimes it's nice to have a little mark where you can say, okay, I'm functioning at this capacity, and with that I've become responsible for these things, right? And I will tell you, there's as your consciousness expands, your motivation shift, right? And you become more directed towards wanting to help, wanting to teach, wanting to move, people, the culture. You want to move things forward in a way that's beneficial and conducive to everybody having a pleasant and good experience. Sadly, on the course to that, people do have to quite frequently suffer and experience things that are less than good. But overall, they're moving in a positive direction. So as long as you kind of keep that trend line moving up where everybody's moving in a good direction, you're sort of doing your job. And for me, as mine expanded, my motivation shifted, and what I was trying to do shifted, and how I was trying to move shifted. And who knows how it'll work out? I mean, you don't control the outcome, but I can certainly at least control the expression of my own choice in the middle of it. So that's kind of how things have been moving.
Yeah, that's amazing. And to relate on that, my life has become more about being of service. And I do tell people, yes, there's a self-service. I am, and I mentioned this on the podcast, and it took some cojones to say that, but I'm on a path to enlightenment. I have a teacher. She's in her mid-80s. I don't really know where I vibrate, to be honest with you. I don't go and check it. But in terms of how much more light, and I call it enlightened in a way of being able to hold more and more light, in the sense of making the big wave form more enjoyable in that way. Just with more light, and just very simply, and more light in terms of the physics of it, and more light in terms of lightness, in comparison to heaviness. Just more fluidity, more flow in there. And I only got back to, I let go of that goal years ago. I'm like, I'm whatever. Like, if it comes, it comes. And then I realized, as I read her book, it's called Luminous by Dr. Aubrey Dagnan. And I read the book. I'm like, I gotta work with her. Like, this is part of my mission. I need to do, not need to, but I'm being called to do more work on myself in order to be of greater service, because this is part of my mission. I mean, I moved here from Israel. I mean, I got the calling, like, you gotta go over there. This is where your main mission is. You got a mission here too. You got a mission worldwide, but you got. I feel like I just gotta fulfill my mission. I have my family. I love my family, and I want to talk about attachment, because I was talking to somebody about attachment. If I talk about attachment, I'm thinking about my wife, my kids, my parents, the family. I'm great. I tell them, like, I'm attached to my body. I mean, I'm very grateful for it. It's a great loaner. I give it a lot of kudos, even even through
It is a great loaner.
this injury, and it's providing me a lot, and I'm standing right now, and I'm enjoying the sensations. I'm enjoying the sensations of hugs and kisses and all kinds of things, and I'm enjoying the sensations of food, in my mouth, and there's so many sensations just being with the sensation. And in terms of kind of the listening that I've been getting, the nudges, and actually something that I was very much not into when I was in the Israeli army was obeying. Like, when I obeyed to those things that didn't make sense to me, whether it was about, I'm going to go into the little details, but like shaving, wearing the boots, or kind of messing up my scoliosis even more. I'm like, look, I'm just going to have to wear these sneakers that make more sense, so I can be a productive soldier and help with this effort, of protecting the country and making it as coherent as possible. But what came to me recently is kind of, as you were saying, like the listening and the obeying of, and it may sound weird to some people, but the obeying of the higher vibrations in the world that have saying, like, look, this is what needs to be done. If you're not going to obey,
Yeah.
I'm going to slap you until you obey.
It's it's a higher order system, man.
Yeah.
Hey, can we take a break for a sec?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're continuing a conversation from yesterday. The divine has interrupted with purpose, and as I've been working on this, I get all kinds of interruptions from the divine for ideas that I have, or how things are going to go based on my schedule and the things that I'm setting out to share with the world and do. And I had to surrender again to the idea that this is how it's going to be. And also, as the time was going, be okay with the possibility that you may not be able to make some time today, the day after. So my work on surrendering has been in good good testing, and I was happy to see how little attachment and expectation I had on, like, all right, if it happens, it happens.
That's
If not, I'm
beautiful.
just surrendering
I
constantly.
did find it. I found it kind of incredibly synchronous, and that literally the moment we needed to reschedule, one of your other appointments canceled, and you had a space. That was kind of handy. So
That was nice. Yeah.
you gotta like that.
Yeah, I love how things are organizing themselves, and yeah, when I think you were saying yesterday that response is the only kind of the free will, perhaps the response to the path that is already
Yeah.
written. I'm gonna say from above at the moment, but it's written now. It's like, how are you gonna act and feel on the inside?
One of the guys at the company here at Wizard, we were talking the other day about how how I can effectively take the time to meditate, because I actually now I'm kind of in a different cycle where I'm having to do it a fair amount, and I my response was, well, normally you'd think you'd have to kind of like fight through your day and schedule this and work on that and jockey this around and that sort of stuff. But what I found is the more you actually do that and the more you kind of are lining up with what you're supposed to be doing, things just fall into place. You don't actually have to push. It becomes, it's like the difference between watching someone swim who's really adept at swimming. It seems very smooth, glassy. There's not a lot of splashing. And then you might watch somebody who's like just fighting like crazy to get through the water at a fast pace. And there's all sorts of splashing and flailing in their arms. But when things are moving well, it's very elegant. It's very beautiful to watch. It's just a smooth transition. And I found the same thing with finding times for they're the things that I feel to be necessary for my own personal growth and kind of work at the moment. Because we're all always transitioning through certain things. At least that's my experiences. You're developing and growing and changing, and it sometimes it may be your consciousness, sometimes it may be your physical form. There's always things that are shifting and modulating. And so when I feel like I focus on whatever it is I'm supposed to be working on at that moment, everything else kind of takes care of itself. If I, on the other hand, as I have oftentimes done, put my energy exactly where I know it needs not be at that moment, everything falls apart. It just falls to pieces. So yeah, I try and like align myself with where I feel like I should be working and focusing, but because I've done the other way and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's a cacophonous mess.
I hear you, and I think, and what comes to mind, and as I talk about the map of consciousness often, power versus force. Whenever it feels forceful, usually it's not gonna end up that well, and the results are not gonna
Yeah.
be as fruitful. And I talk
Yeah,
about the
that's
power
very true.
position is just kind of letting things come and responding with grace to them. And as you talk about moving with the water, it's kind of like finding the flow and just letting it take us wherever it's going to go, because it's stronger than it seems like the individual energy. So that's when I think about power versus force. Yesterday you asked me, I think, if I read or listened to any of Doc Hawkins' books, and I read at least 3 of them. I bought all of them at once because somebody did muscle testing on me, and he's like, "You need to get deep into this work." And I did not expect to meet this person. It was at some event, and yeah, and all right, if I get the message now, I act up on it. I do want to say that I do put a good amount of intention of thinking and planning what I'm going to do, although I release the attachments to them. I take people through what I call a 5-year plan, thinking really big and in detail what their life is going to be, but like releasing the attachments. And what I've seen from me and other people is that some of those things will mature very quickly because we've taken the time to sit and really listen, let's say, to the heart of what the soul wants to do, rather than being bombarded a lot of times by a lot of inputs from the world and kind of being perhaps not as tuned in to what the mission is and what will be.
Right.
So I do want to kind of put this for the audience that it is good to have some planning at the same time, to be fluid with how the world is gonna go, because I do find it that I am getting stuff done that I want to get done, such like this podcast, by putting the effort to thinking about it and reaching out. The action has to be taken. Not just sitting and meditating all the time and bringing things to him and saying like, oh, I hope Ian Mitchell texts me today and finds my number somehow. There's an action. Although what happened in terms of connecting us is that I did a podcast with Philip. I reached out to him directly. It was a beautiful synchronicity there that I received the tickets to Modern Nirvana through the Telegram group. I didn't actually look for it. I wasn't looking to get a free ticket, but I was standing in the Apple store waiting for my computer to be repaired, and I was looking at the Telegram group, just waiting, which happened to me before. Like I'm kind of waiting for something, and it happens. My son was only a month old at the time. I didn't plan on going anywhere. I'm pretty active in raising him, but I figured this sounds like a great opportunity to go meet Philip and crew in person. So I flew in the morning to Austin. I flew that evening back home to have that opportunity. And after the podcast, I knew Todd for a few years, and he reached out to me. He said, I think it would be a great idea for you to connect with Ian. Like, if you're into consciousness, you got to talk to Ian. I'm like, I had Ian on my list. Like, it's somebody that I want to talk to probably a year ago. It's like I put a list of people
Cool.
that I want to talk to. And yeah, so I think the intention is important. That's the point I'm trying to make for the audience.
I completely agree. I mean, I think you can have all the events kind of move into your life, because I know that we would have connected at some point, because things happen in a very spiral fashion, and sometimes it may roll past, like with Modern Nirvana. We would have connected there, but I had a really horrible motorcycle wreck right before it, about a week before it, so I wasn't able to go, which was a bummer, but it was a great opportunity for me, because I got to actually put my money where my mouth was and show people sort of what you could actually do in terms of kind of a sort of over the top healing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I'm sure, did you hear about the motorcycle wreck?
I did, but I would love you to share that story for those who haven't heard, and share also the practices you've done to heal. Sounds very quickly.
Yeah. It was just surprisingly fast healing. But the tech is out there. So I was, bopping down the road at about 65 miles an hour, heading into a turn, and hit a patch of gravel and came straight down on my face, and then rolled my bike over a couple times. And my femur, the large upper leg bone, ended up inside of my tibia. So it punched down an inch and split it 6 inches down like a log. And so, I was very quickly carted off to the hospital, and I was conscious the whole time. They were kind of surprised that I didn't have a concussion, face planting at 65 miles an hour and rolling a bike over myself. But luckily, I didn't have a concussion, and I was aware the whole time. So I just had them reading off my stats, and I knew that my body was in shock and kind of what was going on. And so I just talked to the guys as I took the longest, most bumpy 30-minute ride ever to a hospital through backcountry roads, which honestly I was really at the right place at the right time, as odd as that sounds for a really horrible accident, because quite literally I was concerned at first, because the ambulance, I was on a backcountry road 30 minutes outside of town, and the ambulance pulled up just in a matter of minutes. And I asked the guy, I said, did I black out, or, did I lose awareness or something? Because I feel like I've been here. And he was like, no. It was funny. We were literally on the highway right next to the turn for this exit when the call came through. So we just diverted and came right here. And I was like, oh, well, that's fantastic. Because they were literally there in under 3 minutes. So I got to the hospital, and my leg kind of went up and then over at a very unnatural angle. And my collarbone had been split in half too, and it was separated like that. And so they took me in and they did a CAT scan. And when they did it, the two orderlies that were pulling me into the CT scanner, I told them that I was a bit heavier than I look and that they might need an extra person. They're like, "Oh, we've got this. And they grabbed the sheet on the gurney and tried to pull me over, and they hooked my foot on the edge of the CT scanner, and the bone went and chopped my femur out of my tibia, which was arguably the most painful thing I've ever felt in my life. There was about 3 seconds where I just screamed and was like, "Ah!" Because it was really, I just wasn't expecting it. But at the end, it was kind of a good thing, because I didn't have to do it myself. So they did the scan. I had the big hole in my leg and the split down the bone. And then, the orthopedic surgeon came in and said, "Man, it's bad." And I said, "Okay, well, what's the procedure?" And he said, "Well, we put you under general anesthesia. We slice you from your quadricep down to your calf muscle, We're going to have to put in plates and pins and screws and inject bone filler. It's going to be 12 weeks before you can put any pressure on it. And I just kind of paused and was like, is that the best we've got? Like that's the best we can do. And he's like, yeah, that's the standard procedure for this. It's a lateral tibial plateau fracture with a punch through it. So that's kind of what you do. And I'm like, yeah, not doing that. Sorry. And he was sort of vexed by that, but he had told me that there would be so much metal that even after I was healed, you would see the plates through the skin on the outside because it would have kind of a weird shape. And I thought, yeah, sorry, no. And I said, it's cool, I appreciate it, but I'm just going to check myself out. And he was a little puzzled by that, but I just got released, and I called the guys at my lab and said, guys, I need you to go buy one of those fancy hospital beds that has the raising and lowering components, and come pick me up. So my staff rolled up to the hospital, and they wheeled me down on a gurney, and we had literally a pickup truck, since we don't have an ambulance, and like a wounded dolphin, they kind of slid me off on a sheet and slid me into the back, because I couldn't move. And then drove me to the lab and loaded me on the hospital bed that we bought. And then I spent the next couple of weeks just recovering. And so I did, in order to kind of make the rapidity is really fluid. Depending on your intent, you can actually shift things greatly. And so when you combine a very focused intent with a lot of really good tools, you can do things that are just seemingly kind of miraculous, but they're not. It's just a better use of the technology that's available to everybody. So I did pulsed electromagnetic field work, lasers, stem cells, carbon-60, use the Leela Quantum tech, pretty much, hyperbaric oxygen, though I didn't do it in a hyperbaric setup because I couldn't get in my chamber. I actually made a hyperoxygenated water that I drank, which was kind of the equivalent of doing like inline hyperbaric. And so, yeah, so all of those modalities combined, I think, most people know me because of Wizard Sciences and C360 as like the C60 guy. But that's just one area of research. Honestly, I'm kind of agnostic to it. Whatever I think is the thing that will move the needle the most for people is where I place my focus. So that's, I work on the carbon 60 because it's got phenomenal applications that I think people are just scratching the surface of. And then I spent a lot of time working on the quantum tech stuff because I think that's really, quantum biology is really where science is headed next. So I utilize that a lot. And when you combine those sorts of things, you end up with really profound degrees of healing that probably heretofore haven't really been seen. So rather than taking 12 weeks before I could put any pressure on my leg, I was up and walking, like 11 days later, and not with full pressure on my leg. It wasn't completely healed, but by 9 weeks, the bone was entirely healed, completely mended, and I was up and walking. So that was, and I have the X-rays to back it up. And actually, the first week was funny because I went back to the orthopedic surgeon after a week on the 7th day, and I had already healed my collarbone because it's a much smaller bone than than your tibia. So I had moved it back into position, threaded the lines across it, and was kind of healing it very rapidly. And so I asked to have an X-ray of it. And I said, "Look, I can already move my arm. Everything's fine." And he's like, "No." And in the most condescending of medical ways, like, "No, I'm sorry, that's just not possible." And I said, "Look, well, I'd like to get the X-ray." And he's like, "There's no point." He said, "You're not going to have any change radiographically. Like what you're experiencing, just a shift in your inflammatory response. You've had a little decrease in the swelling." I'm like, "No, I would like the X-ray." And so he was like, "Whatever," because I said, he actually was like, "That's just wasting your money." I was like, "Well, it's my money. I'd like to waste it." So he was like, "Whatever," and sent me down the hall to get the X-ray. I get the X-ray, and then I go back and I'm waiting in the room. And like 10 minutes later, the doctor rolls back in with his iPad and he's like, "Do you see this? Do you see this?" I'm like, "Yeah, I see it. What is it?" And he goes, "Well, that's your connection. You have new bone. How do you have new bone?" I said, "Pulsed electromagnetic fields, lasers, stem cells," and he was like, "Wow." It was kind of shy. Actually, what he literally said was, "I guess you are smarter than the average bear," which was, which was kind of funny, but it really, it's not that anything was different. It was just the application, right? I just looked around and thought, okay, what's the best way to heal this injury? I'm always talking about biohacking. This is a perfect opportunity to put my money where my mouth is, right? If I'm actually capable of doing things at an accelerated pace with a higher degree of efficacy, great. This is the perfect time to do it. So I did it, and everything was repaired really, really quickly. And, people were kind of shocked just in, under 3 months, or just basically barely over 2 months, I was back up walking and doing everything. And, It did suck, though, in a sense, because I really didn't like losing the time. I really wanted to go to the biohacking conference and immediately the week after Modern Nirvana, and I wasn't able to do any of those. But it did allow some time for reflection, and it really was a good test. So, I at least got to validate a lot of the things that I'm always prattling on about.
That's awesome. I think that's not only a good test, but a great example to humanity that these things are possible. Moving the needle there, as you
Yeah.
I think you'll be on the same note here. You get this opportunity, if anything,
Yeah,
to
it was
do
a
it
great
yourself.
opportunity.
Laser.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody had asked me like, "Hey, will you break your leg for fun so you can repair it?" I probably would have said no. But
You're gonna
in
do
the
it to me.
circumstance,
Yeah. So
yeah.
the lasers part. What are the lasers that we're talking about? What's that you were mentioning? What's the laser
So
technology?
just medical grade lasers and just stimulating the area. So I was using primarily 570 was the frequency I was using.
Mm-hmm.
Or actually 570. No, it wasn't. It was 568 or something like that. But thereabouts. And so a red laser. So I was just shooting through the tissue into the joint to kind of speed the healing. So I was doing that in addition to just high intensity red LEDs. So I had my team take we use EMR Tech LEDs here in the lab. We've got a bunch of bays that we use to activate V cells and things like that. And so we rigged them up on a little gantry crane and would wheel them over the bed and
Mm-hmm.
lower them, and then flip them on and just irradiate the area. So what I would do is I use the pulse centers PEMF coils,
Mm-hmm.
and so I would put the pulse centers PEMF coils on my leg and then on my shoulder, and I would alternate in 40-minute bursts. So I do 40 minutes on the leg, 40 minutes on the shoulder, and then I would roll in the red lights and do those kind of counter. So so it was. I mean, it was kind of an intense protocol, but it's not like I was going out to play tennis. So I didn't really have much else to do other than focus on just trying to heal myself.
So the red light and the lasers, we're talking about regeneration. That's just to kind of.
Yeah. So basically, what happens is red light is interesting. It's the same. It's the same way that I developed the formula to regrow hair a while back, and it works far better if you use it in concert with red light. And what's really happening there is
I gotta get one of those. But yeah, go on.
hey, happy to do it, man. It's actually just
Is
a great
this a
testimonial.
C360 product that you have there for a while?
No, that was kind of like, that was sort of Gen 1. I'm
Okay.
on Gen 4 now.
Okay.
So, yeah, that was a good start actually, but that was actually why I left C360 is it's my son still runs the lab over there, and so it's the products are great. But they didn't really want to continue developing things, right? And I kind of wanted to make the best products that you could get.
Mm-hmm.
And so one person running that was an accountant who was my partner, and accountants approach things a little different than scientists, I think.
I bet. Yeah. Numbers.
It's more of a refine the costing, just keep doing the same thing over and over and over, and try and eke a buck out. And my thing was like, yeah, that's cool and all, but I'm really kind of helping on trying to refine the process to drop the cost. I've been working on new ways to synthesize carbon-60 so I can do it inexpensively, so I'm able to actually drop the cost on things. But my goal with Wizard was to go out and literally make the best things I could make, right? If I want, one of the formulas that I have is the Olympic formula. And so I was working with Olympic athletes. There were guys who were actually at the time, guys who were going out for the Olympics. And so I wanted to figure out, how do I modulate biology the most? So way back when, like in 2012 or 2013, I filed a patent called Cellular Enhancements in Biological Systems for the Use of Lipofullerene Peptide Conjugates, or something like that. And it was kind of my first blush at, how do I enhance the cells? How do I make them stronger? How do I get a higher output from it? And I did it, but I didn't do it nearly to the capacity that I do now. Right back in the day, I was looking at things that were primarily focused on decreasing inflammatory response and maybe enhancing longevity. And so I took that as a base, and then I kept adding to it. So with the hair formula, I did the same thing. I kind of started with the base, which was just a lipofullerene, and then using dimethyl sulfoxide, DMSO, to actually use it to penetrate. When you put DMSO on something, it allows it to basically turn your skin into a sponge, so you get immediate transfer across the membrane and into the cells. So that was kind of the first iteration. The downside was, if you get the concentrations off, it's a little stingy, and it also leaves you smelling like garlic. And so, it's not the most conducive to your pillow.
Does DMSO
Go
does
ahead.
DMSO I actually use DMSO daily with magnesium. I make my own concoctions, doesn't it penetrate way beyond the skin fascia? I'm just
Oh yeah,
curious.
it does. It goes right through and puts it into your
No.
bloodstream almost instantly. That's actually why you have to be really careful
Mm,
about it and make sure that where you're applying it, if you're going to administer it on some spot on your skin, you need to make sure it's actually clean and doesn't have
yeah.
soap residues and things like that. And it's fantastic as a penetrant. I mean, it's a really great penetrant, but it too is, it's a little, it's kind of like using an 8 pound sledgehammer. You can get the stuff moved through into your system, but if you can do it, I'm always kind of looking for the elegant solution. And so the first iteration was just the lipofullerene with the penetrant DMSO. And then the second iteration, I was able to come up with a way to make the lipid itself act as a penetrant. Then the third iteration, I was combining it with more peptides.
Mm,
And then the fourth iteration, it's combined with peptides, exosomes, and it's got this whole kind of really potent configuration of things. So every time you put it on, you're getting, stem cell growth factors in your hair and all kinds of stuff. So we're going to do at some point, probably in the very near future, do some clinical trials so we can actually vet it out and make the claims on it, because there's a lot that goes into it. But yeah, now it's got, peptides, exosomes, a couple of other special sauce ingredients, and then, a different type of lipid configuration so it penetrates the skin and stimulates blood flow. And it actually, at the end of the day, my personal thought on that, even though it completely regrows hair, is that I probably won't use it as a hair growth thing. I'll probably use it for all the people that are doing like Rogaine, minoxidil kind of stuff, just to stop shedding. Because if you use it in combination, like you don't have typically when you use those other things like finasteride and stuff like that, which I really don't recommend, but it's ubiquitous, right? People want the result, so
mhm,
they go for the thing that gets the result, even if there's a kind of a tendency towards maybe not being so biologically beneficial for you in the long run. Like there are a lot of downsides to finasteride, but people do it, and so I figure if they're going to do it, if I can help them in some way keep the results, because when you do those things, if you stop, you go through this process of shedding where you lose a lot of the new growth, and you'll
mm,
lose big patches of hair and things like that. And if you use my stuff, then it negates that loss. So I'm
mhm,
thinking that it actually might be better as an adjunct to people who are doing the other stuff,
mhm.
to work with my serum to just keep their stuff, as opposed to just being another hair growth thing. Because the other thing about hair growth, and this is kind of funny, but when I would put up pictures of, like the effects people would get, people would not believe them, just because it was so like, what? You can't regrow hair that quickly. Yeah, actually you can. And you do it using the serums in combination with red light. And the reason for that is the red light penetrates the scalp, moves into the cell, and there's a component in your cells called cytochrome. And the red light actually triggers the cytochrome to oscillate, and it's part of the electron transport chain. So when that oscillate, it bumps a nitric oxide molecule off, cycles an oxygen molecule into position, and so you're photonically advancing the cell cycle. So you're basically you're just increasing the rate of cycling of your cell.
Mhm.
And so if you can speed up, exogenously speed up your own cell respiration and the cycling there, then you end up with a very temporally advanced kind of look at it. So your cell just goes through all of its processes more rapidly. So it's not that it's some magical thing. You're just basically using photonic energy instead of your own internal energy.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like plugging yourself into the wall socket. So it makes things appear much more rapid than they would, which is actually why I used it with my leg. Same thing, right?
Mhm.
So you go into the deep tissues, you stimulate blood flow, you cycle things, you move the oxygen through, and you just change the rate of healing. Because it would have arguably, with that bad a break, 12 weeks to put any weight on it would have been a very reasonable and very normal thing. But not everybody has access to all the tools that I have, so I figured I'd use them.
How quickly are we talking about when people were surprised at the results of hair growth?
Well, even with the second generation of stuff, it was kind of shocking. I mean, we've only given it to a couple of people, but weeks. I mean, you see patches of new hair in weeks,
Mhm.
and that's just it's not. People have kind of this idea of like, oh, there's a constraint on how long it takes, and yeah, sure there is, but like everything else, there are exceptions, right? And if you plug yourself into the wall socket, you can do a whole lot more than if you're just running off your own small batteries. So
Do you know if those people would have to continue taking the serum because they're losing hair because of a zinc deficiency or other mineral deficiencies, or what's at play here?
Yeah. So interestingly, the thing I don't actually make products that I want people to be on for a long time, with the exception of maybe like the Olympic and the Neural Serum,
Mhm.
because I your body's under constant attack, and we can discuss that later. But just our environment nowadays, like if we were living in the south of France 1,200 years ago, not really all that much EMF stress, not a whole lot of chemotoxicity in your environment. You're not being blanketed with phytotoxins and xenotoxins and
Mhm.
all that sort of stuff. I mean, we're bombarded with EMFs and microplastics like every day, all the time, and glyphosate in our environment and all kinds of stuff that we wouldn't have had to contend with biologically. So your body's kind of evolved in a certain set of constraints environmentally, and now we've completely altered that, especially in the past, I don't know, the past 20 years. We've just, if you look at the EMF stress, it's profound.
Mhm.
And our bodies, we can pick up all of those frequencies. Normally people just go like, oh, I can't see it, it doesn't do anything. But tell that to something you put in a microwave oven. I mean,
Mhm.
it's like we have a lot of precepts that very demonstrably show that things that you don't see cause a profound change in biology. So with all of that kind of stuff, I like people to keep going on it because it negates a lot of the EMF stress. So if you can blanket yourself kind of from a cellular level out and build your barricade and kind of fortify your own body's defenses against things that are constantly assailing you, I feel it's better. But with the exception of maybe those two things that are just designed to basically deal with the brunt of stresses that you're picking up environmentally, most things I just want people to fix what's ailing them and get off. I've developed
Mhm.
things for a couple of viruses and different types of cancer and hair growth, and in all of those cases, it's not something that I want people to have to stay on. With the hair growth, what's interesting is that if you lost it from here back, it comes in from the back forward.
Mhm.
And then if you stop, you will lose it, but you'll lose it at the same rate that you lost it originally. So it's not, I actually, the reason that came about with the first iteration that I had done, like, I don't know, probably closing in on a decade ago at C360, was my daughter came into the lab one day and said, Dad, your hair's falling out. Like your hairline's receding. And I was like, well, that won't stand. So I literally went back that afternoon, whipped up a concoction and with the DMSO,
Right.
regrew my hair and put it on a shelf for about 3 years. And it wasn't until I think I was having a conversation with Dave Asprey like 3 years later. He was like, dude, seriously, you've got something like that on your shelf? And I'm like, yeah. And, he said, well, why haven't you launched that as a product? And I was like, well, I'm kind of busy working on things like cancer and stuff that I really actually want to help people. And he was like, yeah, man, but you could fund a lot of your research and do things like that. So we started to kind of launch that when I was at C360, and I think they still have it as a product. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
it's, I mean, it's got good efficacy. It works, but it's not, it's, I don't know. Again, it was Gen 1 and I'm on Gen 4. So I would much rather people use something that's, like super good and actually does the job without, smelling like a giant chunk of garlic. But, that's just my particular take.
Do you know if there are any side effects to the brain or any other things besides we're talking about the skin and hair aesthetically?
Well, for which component?
For I mean, it's
The
I
the
mean, and
T60
I
component?
mean, I'm talking about the hair serum, like say Gen 4, right? I mean, and I want to ask also, what
Oh,
are exosomes? I haven't heard of those, but
so exosomes are growth cell
yeah.
factors from stem
And as I'm talking
cells.
about the concoction itself, like, is any research there on checking, I don't know, brain activity, blood work? I mean,
No, I haven't done any of that. I mean, again, we haven't even done the clinical trials with it yet. So it's, at some point we will, but we probably won't look because the penetrant, the way I configured it this go around, the penetrant's going to take it through all of the skin cells and all of the dermal areas, but so all the dermal layers rather, but it's not going to penetrate through your skull.
it is not.
So there really isn't going to
Mhm.
be a
So,
whole lot of transmission. Although honestly, if there were, it'd be great. I mean, it'd be, that's people wouldn't necessarily have to take the other serums if
I
I
see
could
what you.
just,
Yeah.
put it on your head and it'll move through.
Yeah.
That'd be
So
great.
you're generating then other cells in the brain, let's say, that can be beneficial. That's what I was thinking. So
Yeah, and not only that, but in terms of wound healing, it's actually phenomenally weird wound healing serum, because if you do the same thing, you take the growth cell factors, which are or growth factors rather, which are exosomes, and I put in quite a few billion of them. Like when I do the V cell procedures, and I do those all the time. I actually did one yesterday right before we recorded. And that's for people who don't know, that's very small embryonic like stem cells. And the reason I like those is they're quiescent, which just means dormant in your blood. And so they're, not shockingly, the body had a backup system. And so you've got all these stem cells that are in your body floating around in your bloodstream that are dormant, and you activate them through some sort of hormetic stress. And that can be uh, light. So you can do it photonically with lasers. You can do it with cryotherapy. You can even do it with vibration. You can use sound to actually mechanically oscillate them and turn them on. But you have to provide some sort of external stressor, and then they turn on.
Mm-hmm.
And once they turn on, the reason I like those is the very small part is because a normal stem cell is about 18 to 20 microns in size, and these guys are about 6 to 8. So they're about a third of the size. So they'll run right past the blood-brain barrier, and go into your neural tissue and kind of boost the systems in there. But they're pluripotent, so they'll differentiate into anything, any different tissue or bone or anything like that. Which is, if you're trying to heal a broken leg, very very handy. In the first 7, or actually first 6 weeks, I think I did 7 stem cell procedures, which is a little bit intense. And I probably took out a lot of blood, and at the end of the day, I was very very deficient and had to have iron, so because my hemoglobin was incredibly low, so I needed to boost that. But that was a combination of just pulling a lot of blood and using high strength magnetic fields. So and that too is a process of trying to figure things out. But in terms of like the growth factors, they kind of aid as a secondary layer with the V cells to boost things up.
Is the process to activate those dormant cells, V cells, extract them, and then inject them in another area of the body?
Yeah, so you can do it a couple of different ways. So in my lab, it's basically, it's just like a PRP procedure. It's very simple. So you tap a vein, you pull the blood, and so typically we'll take out a pint of blood for me, and then we put it in a thing called Tiger tubes, which are just separation tubes. So they separate the mass of the blood out from the plasma. And so you spin it down, you do a double centrifugation, spin it down, separate it.
What's
take the laser.
Sorry, centrifugation.
Oh, you put it in a centrifuge.
What's that?
Right. So it just spins things at a really rapid rate, and use the G force to
Gotcha. Okay.
or centrifugal force really,
Gotcha.
but it's it's putting extra force on them, so the blood actually separates out. So the whole blood separates from the plasma, and you end up with the heavier fraction at the bottom, which would be the supernatant, and then you end up with the plasma above it, and then you take out the platelet-rich plasma, you put it into tubes, and then you spin it again just to clear anything else out, and then you take the remaining part, and then you hit it with lasers to turn the stem cells on. And I actually do a slightly different process because I do it with a combination of cryotherapy and lasers, because you can use lasers. There's a fellow named Todd Ovakaitis, a real sharp doctor from Johns Hopkins, who does them, and he uses a type of laser that he modulated the wavelengths on, so that this gets a little technical, but like the nodal interfaces kind of counter out, and you put things at an opposite phasing so that you don't end up with a high amplitude, and so there's no thermal conveyance. And so you can do it that way, or you can just offset the thermal loading with cryo. So I put it in a cryo bath, and then I offset that with the thermal loading from the lasers with the cryo bath. And it took a little while to dial in kind of the sweet spot, but once you get it dialed in, it's pretty straightforward. So. And it's also nice because those procedures are crazy expensive, but I wanted to be able to do it to fix myself up. And the other component is it rolls back, as is actually tested. It rolls back a lot of the aging markers biologically. So you kind of that's an added benefit. And like you were asking, you can directly inject it into certain spots, but I actually think it's better if you take a fairly large fraction and inject it just back in via IV or however you want to do it, or directly into the veins, because your body is really brilliant, right? There's quite literally nothing that I've ever developed where nature hasn't done it better. And usually when I find something, I'm like, eureka, this is great. It's actually, I'm generally just mimicking something in nature that I found, or some other biological process, and I'm just kind of piggybacking on the tech of that. And I personally believe that the body is brilliant. It's just infinite in its capacity, and really, for somebody who works with it every day, if you're not, and I truly am, left in awe pretty much every day that I get to work on things that are biological in nature, because it's such a robust and brilliant system. That's, I think in part, that's why longevity has been such a hard thing to crack, is because we're designed to time out, and it has, all these systems in place that are all these kind of really intricate feedback loops. And can you roll back one component? Yeah, you can absolutely roll back one component. You can, create a shift in your methylation markers across a whole host of tests. But if you don't address the energetic components, you're still hosed, right? Because you still get the feedback loop from the outside. And I think that's gonna be something that actually is very evident in the near future, because there are a lot of guys that are really, really sharp cats that are working on, different methods. There's Tato Vakaitis with the V cells. There's Greg Fahey, who's got a thing called the TrimX protocol. That's an FDA registered trial where they're using a combination of DHEA, growth hormone, and I think there's one other component to it. Actually, there's two other components to it. But it's, they've actually shown in humans that they've been able to regress aging. And Greg's a super nice guy and really smart. And he's probably, in my opinion, like the top cryobiologist in the world. He figured out how you can actually freeze organs and then transport them and thaw them out and reuse them. So he's kind of, in the lab, at least in tests with smaller animals. I don't think they've done any human trials with that, but he's figured out how to gentrify the organs so that you can reuse them, which solves the problem of people not being able to get organ transplants. So it's really, really brilliant approach. But in his other role with this other company, he's been working on this growth hormone process to negate aging, and I think it's fantastic, actually. So, and then there's Dave Sinclair, and Dave's been working with genetic reprogramming of the Yamanaka factors, and had a lot of success with that, and showed that they could regenerate ocular nerves and things like that, or optic nerves rather. And I think they're going to take that to human trials in like 2 years. And I know they've done higher order primates, but then David, I guess two weeks ago or something, released a paper showing that using chemical cocktails, they were able to regress aging as well. And so there's a lot of us that are working on longevity, but it's still, I think, and I could be wrong, maybe somebody will actually entirely crack that egg, but I think you can't do it just with one of those systems. There's another fellow that's worked on it named Shaya Fradi in Israel with hyperbaric therapies. And he showed, full age regression in markers is what they called it. But a lot of those things, I think it's maybe slightly overstating for effect. It's brilliant. It's showing a decrease in your aging markers on methylation tests. But if you don't necessarily look younger and function more effectively, I don't really think it's all that great. I would hate to be like a 120-year-old raisin. So, you want to be. Well, I mean, seriously, it's something like you should be able to look at somebody and go, damn, that cat looks great. They look super healthy and robust and strong, as opposed to like, oh, they're 80 and they're, completely frail and whacked out. And you should reflect it in all of your systems if you catch everything. But again, the systems are so complicated that if you miss one component, like when I was working on longevity very recently, I wrote out a huge list of all the different components. And actually, I think in order to really nail it, you more likely than not have to use at least 3 to 4 of all of those different approaches so that you don't have any missing signal. Because if you're missing one of the signals, you're pretty much pickled. And one of the bigger ones was community, sense of community, and I mean, this kind of dials back into you having a men's group. I think that kind of esprit de corps and camaraderie and being able to relate to people is incredibly important.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. And, your research and protocols are amazingly intriguing. I do want to talk about something here, though. First of all, do you have any gray hairs?
Yeah,
They're hiding somewhere.
And actually, this is kind of an interesting thing. So very few, but I use it to track. So, like I was saying with my products, I don't normally recommend that. When I say, I recommend people to take them kind of consistently within bounds, right? So I actually still think that people should cycle on and off. So with my Olympic serum, I'll do a bunch of it for, say, a month and a half, and then I'll take a few days off. Or I'll do it for 3 days and take 2 days off. And I try and consistently vary it, because I don't think that anything is something that really should be consistently applied every day. It's kind of like, working out every single day. That's a bad idea, right? Working out in general, great. Everybody agrees that exercise is good, triggers all kinds of, endocrine responses via skeletal muscle that you really need to stay young and healthy. But you don't want to do it every day because your body needs a period of rest and recovery, and those things are taxing if you do it too much. So basically, everything in a certain measured out portion, but not all the time. So with the gray hairs, I'll look for little patches of gray hairs popping up. And I notice it when I'm A, under huge amounts of stress, or B, when I've cycled off of C60 for more than a couple of weeks. So if I cycle off for like 3 weeks, yeah, absolutely, I start to get little white hairs popping up. And it's kind of funny because I just use it as like, cool. But then when I go back on and I start cycling on again, those hairs, they go from being, it's funny because they're white at the tip and then they're black at the root where they're growing out. So I end up with these kind of, and it's just, it's funny because I can actually track when I'm cycling on and cycling off because I look at the hairs and it's white on the front, black on the bottom. So, it's actually, it's a good marker, but in general, no, because I've been doing my own protocol for, I don't know, 12 years now or so. So luckily it seems like the C60 has actually had a pretty profoundly good impact on me biologically, because I think I can pretty safely say I've taken more of that stuff than any other human on the planet, and I would be the canary in the coal mine. So if it really had an ill effect, I would 100% be the first person you'd see it in, and it seems to be going pretty well so far.
Thankfully, you're taking one for the team, being the guinea pig for a lot of things.
Well, I mean, again, put your money where your mouth is, right? I'm always prattling on about, this and that and how this can help and how that can help. So, I mean, before I did anything with C60 on any other critter, I tested it on myself. I mean, it had a really good safety profile. So it wasn't like I was like, this hydrochloric acid taken orally, that's a great idea. I mean, it wasn't like I was really veering too far out of bounds. It seemed safe, but then when I felt the effects biologically on myself, it was fantastic. So then the next thing I gave it to was my golden retriever Great Pyrenees mix back in the day, and kind of because he had really developed a lot of mobility issues, and I was able to completely reverse the mobility issues and keep him in great health for another 3 years, because he was very much on his way out, and I got another 3 years of time with him, which was awesome. And not 3 years of him just being kind of lumbering around and not able to hop up on my bed anymore. He was, boisterous and running around, and it was that was actually, it's funny because animals don't really have any sense of placebo that I've ever seen. So when you give them something and it really greatly alters their biology, they perk up and they're really happy, and you can see it. And so for me, that was a huge testament that this stuff is pretty good, because my dog recovered. It was probably within 3 weeks or so of taking it that he just rebounded tremendously.
That's so cool. Something I want to talk to you about here with longevity, and I just responded actually to somebody in a Telegram group that has to do with a good amount of Leela fans. And this person in his 30s talking about the body decaying, he's figuring out that, fasting and dry fasting, and perhaps is regenerating more quickly than is decaying. And I was given the point that I'm, and I think we talked about it perhaps off mic yesterday, that I'm cool with death, rebirth, becoming a baby again, or perhaps incarnation, non-incarnation, like another cycle. Not really shying away from it as I described it too much. Although the longevity piece is you're making the point, is the performance while I'm in this body, while I'm in the loner. And I'd love, and we talked about attachment. I do enjoy the relationships that I have with my kids and other people, and my wife, and perhaps this loner at the moment. I will do what I can to enjoy and perform as best as I can, but it's not like I'm trying to extend my life in this body till I'm 500, 600, which I've heard some yogis talk about. And I've seen some really, really healthy yogis at 70 that are way more vital than me. What's your take here on longevity and figuring out those puzzles of decaying with the piece of, at some point, letting go of this incarnation?
I don't think that you can ever go past, I mean, in my estimation, and this may not seem terribly scientific or be really well received, but when it's your time to go, it's your time to go. And, if that means you're going to walk in front of a bus or you're going to be laying in a hospital bed, it's kind of irrelevant. You've worked through what you have decided to work through. And so you hit the ripcord and you're going to check out. And I would hope that people reach the level, and this isn't actually the case, and I know that people won't, but it's kind of my hope that people move towards the capacity where if they want to leave, they can just decide to check out at that moment and do it of their own accord. And the reason that that's my hope is because you have to have reached a certain level of personal development, and your consciousness has to have moved to a certain level in order to do that. Now, will that happen? No. Over time perhaps, but there's a lot of work that's required to be done to get to the point where you can hit your own ripcord and check out when you want to. And I think the focus on longevity is good because, in my view, your body is kind of a loner, uh, and so it's sort of incumbent upon you to take care of it. Because if you're going to do the things that you want to do, hopefully, if your life is just kind of pointed at sitting in front of a TV or something like that and sitting on a couch all day, great. Maybe you should just fade away slowly, and that's perfectly fine with you. But I want to be able to make serious changes and help do a lot of things and use my kind of inherent capacities. I feel like I'm blessed in certain ways, but I see a lot of responsibilities that come along with it, right? If you can figure out a lot of things and help kind of nudge science forward or nudge the culture forward and do things like that, then it's really a responsibility. And it's hard to do that if you're in a frail body physically. If you're healthy and strong, you have the energy and the capacity to do that. I mean, I pull all-nighters all the time, and I'm working on projects around the clock and things like that. And I was working with one of the people in the lab who's in their 20s, and they said, how the hell are you doing this in your 50s? Like I'm whipped out in my 20s. I'm like, well, I'm kind of trying to pull energy from a slightly different source. I mean, and I'm very driven. I'm very passionate about what we get to do here. In its highest form and use, the things that I'm trying to work on and the puzzles I'm trying to solve will be really beneficial for everybody. And I'm actually very driven about that. I wake up jazzed that I get to come in. I'm still psyched that I actually get paid well to do the kind of ridiculous things that I get to work on. Like I get to work on all kinds of crazy things from all different fields of science. And to me, I'm like a kid in a candy store. It's epic. And I want to be strong enough physically to do that. I want to be able to run and swim and work out and, play and go out and have fun. And I can, and that's, but it takes effort, right? I mean, biologically, you're degrading. That's the natural course of things. Does it have to be that way? Personally, I don't actually think so. But would I want to live forever? No, absolutely not. That's at some point, when everybody else is rolling around in, cars on the ground, and, you see a new hovercraft fly by. Yeah, I think it'll probably be time for an upgrade. I don't want to be locked in a specific position in time. And I think the learning that you have to do while you're in a physical form is probably what dictates how long your life is. And I would posit that you have a specific set of things that you're trying to pick up and learn in a lifetime. And when those things have expired and you need to move on, you move on. Like amazingly, I actually went past third grade in school. I didn't decide that I wanted to stay in third grade forever. Now, I had great friends. I really enjoyed third grade. Shout out to Mandeville Elementary School. But I decided at some point that it was necessary to move on to fourth grade. And, and the system is structured in such a way that you actually matriculate, you graduate, you move on. Mm-hmm. And I think life is the same way. There's a lot of people who are probably driven, especially in the sciences, because they lack a sense of continuity about what's coming next, and they're probably worried that, at the end of this, as my dad always says, well, it's almost time for the dirt nap, which always cracks me up because he is kind of reaching the very end of his lifespan, and he is about the most balanced and even keeled about it. He's just, okay, so we need to take care of this and this and this because I'm not going to be around much longer. I've got to deal with this. But he has no fear or trepidation about it. He's just getting prepared to bounce out of here. Mm-hmm. And it's really kind of beautiful to see that in a person as opposed to somebody who's freaked out, clinging to life, trying to stay in a form that's all broken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your perspective. And I'm with you on that one. And I think it's actually exciting to think about the next one. In terms of the next incarnation, my daughter, who's 4, tells me, sometimes I'm like, oh, I want to be a little prince. She's like, yeah, maybe next one. She has the idea that and I'm gonna keep it now in those container. There's a boy and girl. Okay, well, let's just say for a second that those are constraints. A boy is gonna become a girl, and it keeps going. So the next one, daddy, when you become a baby again, you can be a little princess. And I'm like, that sounds pretty fantastic. So seems like a lot of fun to being her. So
I will send you a tiara. So.
I do want to say that you send me the video of you playing at the lab with the 3700. Is it Celsius or Fahrenheit we're talking about? I'm just curious.
It's Fahrenheit, 3,730
Okay,
degrees.
so
Yeah,
playing at the lab, and I'm seeing how much fun you're having, and I'm thinking like, damn, like I have a good amount of fun, but Ian is having more fun than I am. I mean, he's as you're saying, like in the youthfulness of kind of like the childlike desire, and with your maturity to like, okay, I'm doing things like I know I have experience, I'm going to do this for the world. But you are really, and then the body, right? So you're doing the longevity piece of it to have, right, to be able to pull all-nighters, and the 20-year-old is thinking about it, and like, how is he doing this? So your whole being, in terms of your energy, your mentality, and now you have the vehicle to actually to keep performing with that childlike curiosity and excitement. And I think I'm like, damn, like Ian is having more fun than I am, and it's not that I'm actually it's not coming in jealousy. It's like, okay, so like, all right, I gotta learn something from him, or like keep going with it. And I was taking the C360 products for 3 years, and then I have heard you in NMN and resveratrol and Daisy Claire, and I'm gonna switch up now. I'm gonna upgrade my situation to be able to do more with the energy that I wake up in the morning, and yeah, I'm decaying faster than I'd like, in terms of having this experience of really merging the inner child. I'm an adult. I put the quotations mark here for the ones who are not watching the video podcast. Like, I don't think there are any adults. I think it's just, grown up kids running the world, or just doing more things. And I think it's a good situation when we have kids doing these things, because kids are in that way innocent and really expressing their truth self. Hopefully, still, I don't know. And at what age that dissipates, it seems to be dissipating quicker and quicker. But I'm doing what I can to preserve that in myself and within my kids, to let them find out really who they are in that way, before advancing to figuring out how to behave and act in the world to fit in.
That's
And
beautiful.
so, yeah, I mean, I really admire that about you, and I'm looking forward to getting keep hearing and learning from you on how to preserve and even enhance that childlike energy, and bring it to fruition in the highest capacity that I can. And to me, that sounds like a lot of fun. I'm here to have
Yeah, it
fun.
is fun.
Yeah.
I'm super passionate. I think part of it is do things that you love, right? Do things that you're passionate about. When I started C360, it was years before we had any revenue or anything like that. It was literally just, it was basically a full-time job in addition to my, at the time, full-time job. So I was consistently always working over 80 or 90 hours every week all the time, because I was doing two full-time jobs. One of them paid nothing. But I believed in it because the technology was there, and I saw the science, and I saw where it could go. And it never seemed like it was work per se. It was because I loved what I got to do. I mean, I have a phenomenal team of people that I get to work with. And that's part of the other thing is, so if you're able to surround yourself with people that are vibrant and passionate and kind, that you want to be with, that you would aspire to be like. If you can put people around you that have components, maybe not in every single aspect, but a lot of their components are things that you aspire to be like or emulate, that's fantastic. I mean, I get to work with fantastic people, like my COO, the guy who runs most of the logistics at Wizard. He's a really kind human. He was a ex-military. He was a captain, but then he let go of his commission so he could become a warrant officer to be a helicopter pilot. So he didn't want to fight, so he decided to be a medevac pilot, because he thought, how best can I help? I don't want to hurt people, I just want to help people. So he became a medevac pilot. And it's things like that in Jack's case, there's a kind of an inherent kindness to him as a person, and I admire that. I aspire to kind of embody that, and to try and help people on a grand scale. And everybody else here, I mean, there are components like one of the women that works here. Um, she translated. We received an email by mistake from a woman in Germany, and who just happens to have been in a scooter wreck and had head trauma and some physical trauma, all of the things that we can literally deal with probably more effectively than just about anybody with some of the serums that we have. But she had been in this wreck and was sending a note to her doctor in Munich, and somehow or another, and the email addresses are not even remotely close, but it ended up here. Now it would have just gone unnoticed, but one of my team members literally took the time to translate it from German and then brought it to me and slapped it on my desk from the German to the English and said, "Listen, here's the situation. What do we do?" And I said, "Reach out to her, see if she wants us to send her some serums. Just explain to her that the owner of the company and has been through something that's similar, and he feels we can help." And so she did, and the woman said, "Yeah, I'd love to try it." And I didn't want her to feel like it was a sales pitch. And I said, "Look, we'll just send you the stuff that we feel is necessary to help you. And if you get it and it works, please let us know. Much love. Here you go." And so we just sent everything out to her in Germany so that we could help, because I don't think that there's anything that's a coincidence. I'm a little too observant to think that there is such a thing as coincidence. Now, it might be a pattern that's too large for most people to pick up, myself included, but I have yet to see something that when I actually drill down is actually a coincidence. I've never seen one. Everything I've ever experienced is some small part of a much larger order, of which I probably don't have the access to at the moment. So in this case, when I saw that, I was like, wow, the odds are kind of strange that we would get that. It would go to one person who can translate it, and they would have the exact condition that we can help with. So in that case, what do? You help. That's you try and share, just like the guys here, you try and share the kindness. But it took her taking the initiative literally to translate a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-page medical document into and into English before. And she didn't even realize that it was, she thought, because of the conditions when it started with the diagnosis, that this woman had sent it to us because it was so uncannily aligned with my accident, that she just assumed it was. And it wasn't until she reached the end of the translation when she realized that it was actually supposed to be going to this lady's doctor in Munich. And that's why, she wrote in the email, "I apologize for any, break in your privacy. It was not until we completed the translation that I realized that, sorry, we were looking at your personal records." But those things, that's when I think things are, it's a little on the nose, right? That's not a coincidence that it shows up in the mailbox of the one person who could readily translate it, and that it's something that we can fix. Yeah, okay. I mean, you could say that's random, but if you looked at the email addresses, there's no way you can miss those email addresses. They're not even remotely close. I just took that as, okay, well, here's a person that we're supposed to help, and we received the message loud and clear, so let's help.
It's so beautiful. I do want to touch on something you said earlier. If somebody can surround themselves with people they're inspired by, you can, they really want to be in their energy. I'm gonna at least put my opinion there. It's not an if. Perhaps it may not align for somebody right now, but they can put the intention that will happen within a year or 5 years or 10 years. So I don't want to give people an out to be like thinking like, I live in this place, and that's too hard, and my job is not gonna be able to pay to go and live in this specific place where there's one person perhaps that they want to be close to, who's already perhaps substantiated, has a company, and they can slowly migrate their energy and be affected by those waveforms to enjoy more of their waveforms. And that's part of what I do. Is I am I'm very much about commitments and giving the nudge to people and just telling them like, look, you are the creator of your own life. It's up to you to take the action. I don't really like to give people an out. Are you in agreement there, or do you think there's an out here?
No, I think there's an out. I think there's no problem so great that you can't hide from it, even if that means your entire lifetime. Yeah, I think I think you can try and take yourself out of play. Now, do I think that's a wise move? No, I think that's the most boneheaded, horrible approach you can take, because the world is going to conspire to make you a better person no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The universe is set up in such a way that you're going to get the education and you're going to end up in the environment you need to end up in, whether you do it of your own choice or whether you're forced to do it by circumstances, sometimes good, sometimes bad. That's up to you. So I think you can consciously make the decision to go in the wrong direction and to hide from things. But I think you're far better served if you, as you said, place the intent and the focus. I mean, that's the right way to do it, in my opinion. Um, can you get out of that? Yeah, sure. You could, I could drop everything right now and go into a cave in Rishikesh, which was, 30 years ago. That was my original intent, was to drop everything and just go into a cave for 12 years and meditate my way to enlightenment, then come back and teach whatever that actually meant. That was obviously, it was not the way things were intended to go. At the time, I didn't realize that, but in retrospect, I can look back and go, yeah, probably best that I didn't dip out entirely and go live in a cave on the side of a mountain in Rishikesh. But that was my intent. Ultimately, it was far better that I stayed here and did what I did and went through the experiences I've had, and had, a family and kids and businesses and all of the pressure and stress that goes along with that. Primarily, I think, because if you want to help people, you have to understand what's going on, right? You can't just if somebody's having a really rough go of things, you can't go, look, I know your life totally sucks right now. Just leave, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I know your kids are having issues. It's very difficult. You could step up, but just leave. That's, I don't actually think that's like the best advice you're going to get. So could you? Yeah, you could, but your approach is better. And the other thing I'd say there is your idea of saying, what you place your intent on in 1 year or 5 years or something like that. There's a lot of power to that, because where you create, to a certain extent, your own reality. In fact, I will qualify that and say, to the extent that your consciousness has advanced, you can create your own reality to a very high degree. You can manipulate the reality around you to a very high degree. And you can do it at will. You can change material things, you can change social things. And that sounds like a strange thing to say scientifically, but I know that to be a fact. So it's not something that's terribly public, but that is in fact the case. Depending on the strength of your consciousness, you can manipulate all of the things in your physical and environment, and certainly your emotional and psychological environments easily. And I think it's kind of important that you realize, if you place focus on something specifically, over time, if you provide energy to that, you're literally setting up a manifestation. You're propagating a wave. If you wanted to look at it just from a physics standpoint, every time you have a thought, there's either an electrical or an electrochemical impulse. That impulse propagates a wave. That wave will propagate forever, in perpetuity. That's just the physics of it. That's how that works. Now, if you do the same thing over and over and over and over, and keep the same focus and the same intent, over time, you'll start to create a waveform that's larger, that has more amplitude, that has a more probable outcome of creating that existence around it, right? So first you create the form, then things tangibly coalesce around it. So can you actually create something out of nothing? Yeah. If your consciousness is strong enough, sure you can. Very easy to do. That's, Satya Sai Baba, right? I mean, there are guys who do that all the time. Like, I want lunch, poof, lunch. It's not that difficult a thing to do. Do I think that's something everybody should be doing? Probably not. But that's like, if that's what you want to do, go for it. Pull a ruby out of the air. It'll make people kind of excited, I think. Cool trick. But if you can move people emotionally and psychologically and intellectually, I think you're probably going to move the needle a little bit more for helping humanity as a whole. And what do I know? Maybe giving somebody a bauble makes a big difference. But I think actually in that case, I'm kind of jibing Sat Baba or Sai Baba, but I think sometimes people need a tangible representation of what is possible. And when they see something like that, if they don't overtake themselves with their own doubt, it does serve as a good representation of what is possible. And sometimes you need to show people that kind of stuff, because people have a difficult time with that. And sometimes I think, like anything else, I think actually physically manifesting something out of thin air, though very doable, is maybe a little too much, because you have to kind of look at where a person is at in terms of their consciousness and what they think is possible. And you don't want to too rapidly shift things. Otherwise, you'll pull them to a point where it kind of snaps their reality. And that's not really a benefit to anyone.
Mhm.
You want to see where they are, see where they can be, and help gently move them. It's kind of the same thing I would say if I taught somebody to meditate is when you're meditating, you sit there and most people are, let's say they're going over a mantra or something. Well, it's subtly aligning your nervous system, and you don't want to, when you notice yourself wandering in thought, as everyone will, you don't want to go damn and forcibly pull your attention back. You want to very gently pull it back, because your nervous system is supple, and those sharp juts and spikes in it don't serve any benefit. They're actually a detriment to you. It's kind of like if you were training a dog and you smacked it. You don't want that. You want to very gently do that, and move it back into alignment. And so with energy, it's the same thing. You can create things out there by focusing on it and placing intent. But the best thing to do is look at, again, totally my own take, and this is moving off tangentially a bit, but look at where you are in your life, look at where you want to be in your life, and very clearly imagine that future. And don't focus on the steps in between, because you won't be able to control them. Focus on where you want to go, set the map, and then allow kind of like the cosmic GPS, if you will, to chart out the course, because it may not seem like the most logical course, but it's going to be the most effective and efficient course for your particular path. And let the events unfold. Keep your mind squarely focused on where the outcome is desired to be, and then let things unfold. Because if you're doing it kind of in accord with everybody else's benefit, I think you'll find that it's a very beautiful path, and things roll out in almost a magical fashion, where you couldn't have predicted that things would move the way they move. But keep your intent squarely focused on the future. Every day, focus on it. Place your intention, and the biggest component is do it with love, because kind of the baseline frequency of this entire place, and by place I mean this universe, is love. And so you can literally, if you have enough love, you can change, alter, help anything here, and communicate with anything, right? Because if I said I'll give you, $10 million or $10 billion to do something, but you have to, get rid of your son to do it, you'd never do it, right? Because what's greater, anything materially or love? Love. And when put to the test, no one is going to make that choice in the counter of that. So everyone is going to move towards that. So the focus, when you open your heart and you move from a space of love, that's really kind of the key. If you can do things and run it through that, you'll provide your own coherence, because you'll be basically backed up with the resonance of the entire universe if you focus on things with love and intent. And the purity will take care of itself over time, because I think people are generally moving through their own experiences in a lifetime, or in many lifetimes in some cases, and they kind of thread that out. But if you do it with enough love, it sort of clarifies and purifies itself. So at the end of the day, the course gets very clearly mapped out. And it sounds like a very esoteric sort of thing, but that's been my personal experience, and the experience of quite a few other people that I know that have kind of walked similar paths. So
And that's amazing. Thank you for this powerful, inspirational message. We'll leave our audience with this. I think this is a very, very powerful thing to kind of bask in. And thank you for sharing everything in your time, day after
I'm
day.
happy to.
It was so much fun to me personally, and I know this message is going to, and all these messages and explanations and education about how things work, really, which is the essence of what I put as my mission to facilitate in here, is going to make a big waveform in creating more coherence in this reality. So
Great.
thank you so much. As you talked about son versus money, I have to go tend to my son here. We
Good.
have
Perfect.
some logistics in here. Really, really appreciate you. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for listening. Big aho, and I'm sure I'll have Ian for another one as I have many and million more questions that I want to ask him and get his 2 cents on. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Much love, man. Much love to everybody out there. Bye.
Well, lovely beings, I hope you enjoyed and were inspired by this conversation as much as I was. You can find the full show notes and all episodes on my website at yonihavana.com/podcast. If you are a man and you are called to do transformational work to become a better man, to find and grow the divinity within you, and you are longing a community of masculine men who share a passion for growth, please check out Men of Integrity by going to moi.community. Lastly, if you are enjoying the Yoni Havana podcast, I'd be so grateful if you take a moment to leave us a rating and a review on your podcast app of choice. The Yoni Havana podcast is a brand new show, and your support would help reach new people by rating higher on the algorithms. Also, your feedback would help me deliver the best experience to you as the show keeps evolving. Much love and a big aho. See you on the next one.